It started with my 10th grade English teacher, Mr. Baldwin, showing up late for class. Before his arrival, several of my classmates had made the usual joke about being legally allowed to go home if Mr. Baldwin didn't show up after 15 minutes. That's right. Kids have been making that joke going as far back as the 80s. But after 15 minutes and Mr. Baldwin still hadn't shown up, a sense of unease started to creep its way into the class. No one laughed or got out of their desks. We simply sat there and watched the clock tick away. I guess teachers play hooky too, my best friend Owen said to me. Owen Fielder was a sardonic and sometimes aloof boy, with dark hair and a fair appearance that I was envious of. What do you suppose English teachers do when they play hooky, Pete? You think Mr. Baldwin is curled up with a dictionary somewhere? It's not just him, I said, suppressing a laugh and hooking a thumb behind me. There was an empty desk there. Larson never came today either. Hal Larson was a quiet boy. He was genuinely good-humored but always so quiet. I had run into Hal outside of school over the weekend and he had said something strange, but I tried not to think about it. No one had showed much concern about his absence. After all, students were absent all the time. Kids got sick or they played hooky. But teachers, well, teachers were always there now, weren't they? And when they weren't, there was always a substitute in their place, ready to prove themselves. Maybe they're both dead. A boy sitting behind me said. His name was Caleb Summers. Not that I would mind. One less boring teacher and one less numbnuts in the world. No, I wouldn't mind that at all. Good riddance, have a nice trip, see you next fall. Shut up, rat boy, Owen said. Once in 8th grade, a rat had found its way into the school. When Caleb saw it, he screamed a high-pitched scream and nearly fainted. Since then, Owen had gotten to calling him Rat Boy. Normally, I wouldn't be one for name-calling, but Caleb Rat Boy Summers was a shrewd and nasty kid, and he had a tendency to get on people's nerves. He was like a mosquito that kept buzzing at you and wouldn't stop, no matter how many times you swatted him away. The nickname was well suited for him. "Oh, bite me, Fielder," Caleb said, and he gave Owen the finger. "I would rather bite into a cyanide capsule," Owen said, flipping the bird in return. "You shouldn't say things like that, Caleb," another boy said. He had a not-so-subtle southern drawl that I always found endearing. His name was Chester Higby. "What if they really got hurt?" "Oh, screw off, you hick," Caleb said. "I'm sure they're both fine, probably making out somewhere." The banter eventually died out and a terrible silence had taken over the class. Then approximately 35 minutes after class was supposed to have started, Mr. Baldwin stepped into the room. His face was pale and sweaty and he looked nothing like the cool and hip English teacher that I was used to seeing at the start of every day. He looked tired, so very, very tired. "Hey guys," Mr. Baldwin said in a pallid voice. "Hey guys." Normally Mr. Baldwin would start the day with a hearty, "Morning class," and whenever we didn't respond enthusiastically enough, he would say it in an even louder voice. "I said good morning, class." "I don't know any other way of saying this, so I'll just come out with it," Mr. Baldwin said. Your classmate, Hal Larson, is dead. I was just in a meeting with the rest of the faculty. We're canceling school for the day. You're welcome to use the phone in this room or in the main office to call your parents if you need to. We'll also have grief support later this week for those of you that need that. I'm so sorry, guys. I'm just so very sorry." A sort of dumb shock had taken over our class. Mr. Baldwin started sobbing and it was weird seeing him cry. You never saw teachers cry. Occasionally you saw them at the supermarket and that was strange enough, but you never saw them cry. No one said anything for what felt like an eternity, and then a girl started sobbing as well. Other students had similar reactions and some asked Mr. Baldwin what had happened. but he wouldn't say. But most of us just hung our heads in a kind of numb sorrow. This was the first time that I had experienced a death this close. Sure, I had distant relatives that died, but I saw Hal Larson every day of the week. And now he was dead. It felt unreal. I thought the encounter that I had with Larson outside of school, I had tried to forget it, but it was hard to forget now. The memory rang loud in my head. Pete, you're not going to believe it," Larson had said, running up to me a couple of days ago. His face was sweaty and he was more energetic than usual, and he had a very intense look in his eyes. "I just saw my dead dog, man, and he was glowing. He was glowing. I missed him so much. I saw him, I swear it." Before I could even respond, he ran off. I shook away the memory and I looked back at Caleb. When our eyes met, a defensive look came over his face. "What are you looking at, Pete? It's not like I didn't think he was actually." But his voice trailed off and he simply looked away in shame. Of course, rumors immediately started flying about how Hal Larson had died. The sort of low and nasty kind of gossip that only high schoolers can make. It wasn't until the evening news that we found out more details. Hal Larson's body had been found near a pond, completely lifeless. There had been no signs that he had drowned and there were no signs of a struggle. The police said that they were treating the case as a potential homicide, but they weren't ruling out drugs or some kind of illness. It was all the information that we were given. School resumed the next day, but it was anything but a normal day. The school had brought over grief counselors and experts who spoke to us at length about dealing with death and letting it all out. The police came as well and asked if anybody knew anything. I told them about my encounter with Hal, what he had said about his dog, but the officers just looked at me with raised eyebrows and then dismissed me, like I was some annoying child. In between classes, as kids walked to and fro in the hallway, more rumors spread. "Aliens, man. It was the aliens that got him. He obviously OD'd. I got a cousin that OD'd. Hey, you got any more pills? What if there's really a killer out there? Oh Jesus, oh Jesus." I swear that I saw him the other day. He said that he saw his dead dog. Isn't that kind of strange? He said his dog was glowing. I don't know, he was into some weird stuff, man. He was such a sweet guy. He was horrible. He was in with the wrong people. Oh Jesus, what if I'm next? It's wrong, Chester said in one of our afternoon classes. All these terrible things people are saying about Larson, it just ain't right. Savages, Owen said. The guy hasn't been cold for more than 24 hours and people are piling on him. It makes me want to hurl. But what do you think happened? I asked sincerely. I hated the gross rumors as well, but there was a part of me that deeply wanted to know why Larson had died. His death was a total mystery. It was almost as if the life had been sucked from his body. I had told Owen and Chester about my encounter with Larson, and neither of them could make any sense of it. I don't know, Owen said sadly. I don't want to know. I hope it was peaceful, Chester said. I hope whatever happened, he went peacefully. Nobody dies peacefully, Caleb muttered under his breath. Shut up, rat boy, Owen said, turning toward Caleb in disgust. Nobody asked you, and stop saying creepy stuff like that. And Caleb made a face at Owen but said nothing else. It seemed to me that he was still dejected and ashamed of the comments that he had made the other day, back when we all thought that Larson was alive. To make matters worse for Caleb, more and more people were finding out about what he had said. Maybe they're both dead. Not that I would mind, no, I wouldn't mind that at all. High school gossip was like a terrible game of telephone. Somebody said one thing and that one thing was stretched and pulled and changed until it no longer resembled the original thing that it once was. Words were like wind, always flowing and changing direction. It was Summers, man. It was Summers that did Larson in. You hear what Summers said. He said, I wish I had killed Larson. No, he said that he did kill Larson. Didn't you hear Summers hated Larson? He had been planning this for years. Yeah, Summers is messed up in the head. He's a freak. Glowing said his dog was glowing. Well, how did Summers do it? Oh God, what if I'm next? Oh, Summers is gonna get his. It didn't matter what Caleb actually said. His words had taken on a new life, and words eventually reached the adults about Caleb's little joke, or one of the telephone diversions of it, and the police came to speak with him. Nothing came out of it, legally at least, but from that point on, whenever Caleb had walked the hallways, people would step away from him, like he smelled or he had the plague. People would sneer and somebody pushed him into a locker. And Caleb Summers had become a leper. I almost feel sorry for Summers, Owen said one day after school. We were watching Caleb leave the school and some kids were heckling him. Almost. Oh, come on, Owen, I said. Caleb, he sucks, but he doesn't deserve this. Doesn't deserve it, Owen said, irritated. This is Caleb Summers that we're talking about here. The same Caleb Summers that laughed at Molly Hansen when her cat went missing. The same Caleb Summers that called Darren Lowe a you-know-what. The same Caleb Summers that cut Larry McDaniel's bicycle tires. As far as I'm concerned, Rat Boy is getting what he deserves. I guess, I said, but he didn't have anything to do with Larson. This is high school, Pete, Owen said matter-of-factly. So Rat Boy will get hazed a little bit. No one actually believes he's the killer. By next week, people will have forgotten all about him. I could do nothing but shrug and hope that that was the case. A vigil was held for Hal Larson on Friday night. It was a beautiful ceremony that took place on the high school's athletic field. Larson's parents spoke and many of his teachers and classmates were scheduled to speak as well. Everybody lit candles and the whole field was bright with little orange flames. I was with Owen and Chester near the back. I hope I never see my mom cry like that, Chester said. God, that was hard to take. I feel so bad for his parents. I don't know if my mom would be happy or sad if I died, Owen said. I couldn't tell if he was joking. It was hard to tell sometimes. I wonder if I would get a vigil like this if I died, I thought morbidly. Mr. Baldwin had taken the stage and was giving a speech, but his voice had faded away into the background because of what I saw. I saw 3 people who were walking away from the vigil. Even in the dark, I could tell one of them was unmistakably Caleb. The other 2 figures were leading Caleb into the school. No, forcing him was more like it. I nudged Owen and Chester and I pointed at the 3 figures moving in the dark. Oh, this is not good, Chester said. Yeah, we have to check it out, I said urgently. Do we have to, Owen said, but eventually sighed. All right, let's go. The 3 of us put out our candles and made our way to the school entrance and slipped inside the building. We walked down the school's darkened hallways. It was eerie being in school after dark. It didn't take long to find them. They were in the gymnasium. It was the screaming that gave them away. When we walked into the gym, Caleb was on the ground in tears and his nose was bleeding. 2 students were standing over him. One of them was kicking Caleb, kicking him hard. The student who wasn't doing the kicking was Alan Hawks. He was the quarterback of our football team. Alan in a lot of ways was unlike most jocks. He was an all-around decent guy who was nice to everybody. He hung out with the other jocks, but he would also play cards with the nerds. He had a vast comic book collection, aced every test, and he could sling a football 60 yards without even trying. He was a total Boy Scout, but tonight he towered over Caleb like some sort of vengeful Greek god. The other boy was Trevor Madison. If Alan was Superman, Trevor was his Lex Luthor. He was fond of leather jackets and he smoked on the regular. He didn't care about school spirit or football games and he flunked at almost everything. I don't think that he had ever read a comic book in his life. He was the one who was kicking Caleb. Alan Hux and Trevor Madison were both on two opposite ends of the high school spectrum, and seeing the two of them standing together was a surreal experience. Superman and Lex Luthor had joined forces. There had been so much heat on Caleb this week, so much frustration taken out on him, and now it had all come to this boiling point, where two students stood over him, like a pair of lions ready to pounce on a gazelle. "What is going on here?" I said. Alan and Trevor turned around. Caleb looked up, but there was no relief on his face. "What does it look like?" Trevor Madison said, and there was a maddening gleam in his eyes. "We're giving Summers what he deserves." I didn't do it," Caleb said out of breath. "Shut up," and Madison gave him another kick. "Hey, stop that," I yelled. "Come on, Alan, this is insane, he didn't do anything." "What about you, Fielder?" Alan said darkly, and his face, which was normally so cheery, was a cold slab of stone. "You hate Summers as much as anybody. You don't think he deserves a butt kicking." "I think," Owen said, and there was a slight hesitation in his voice. He looked at Caleb's pathetic form on the ground and gave another sigh. "I think Pete's right. Much as I don't like Ratboy, he's no killer. We were all there when he said what he actually said. It was a dumb joke and it was in poor taste, but that's all. He didn't even know Larson was dead at the time." "You boys are taking this way too far," Chester said softly. "You didn't hear what he said tonight," Alan said coldly. "Tell him what you said." "Yeah, go on, Summers, tell him," Trevor said. "Tell him what you told us, you freak." At first it didn't seem like Caleb would say anything. He simply rubbed his bloody nose on his shoulder and spit on the gym floor. And then he spoke. His voice was pallid and pitiful sounding. "I saw him. I saw Larson. I saw him tonight, and he was glowing." No one said anything. We simply stared at him in dumb shock. In the back of my head, I thought of my encounter with Larson. I could tell that Chester and Owen were thinking the same thing. Glowing. Larson had said that his dead dog was glowing. And then Alan spoke. He came running up to the vigil saying this nonsense. "Larson's alive, Larson's alive." Can you imagine? It's bad enough what's been said about him this week. He couldn't just stay away tonight. Couldn't just leave it alone. He had to come and try to rile everybody up with this BS. At Larson's vigil, for crying out loud. Imagine if Larson's parents had heard him. "You should have stayed away, Summers, and nobody wants to see your face." And so Hux and I got the idea of bringing him in here and giving him some justice, Trevor said. And again there was that maddening gleam in his eyes again. We got him away before anybody else could hear him. I gotta admit I didn't know that Hux had it in him. Alan didn't say anything. He simply looked down at Caleb with complete disgust. I saw him, Caleb said, and there was no hysteria in his voice. He spoke as if every word was true. Trevor brought up his leg for another kick. "No, wait," I said, and I bent down to get eye level with Caleb. His face was a mess of blood, a snot and tears. I had gone to school with Caleb for years. He had not been a nice kid. He lied and said terrible things, poked at too many people. But there was something about what he said. Maybe he was lying, but what if he wasn't? "What do you mean you saw Larson?" "I saw him," Caleb said hoarsely. "I saw him by the park and not too far from the pond. He was glowing and smiling. He waved to me. I swear he did. I know that he's dead, but I saw him." "Oh, give me a break," Trevor said, and he connected another kick with Caleb's stomach. Caleb groaned, and it seemed to me that Madison was enjoying all this a bit too much. "Stop that," I said, and then I shoved Trevor. "What's your problem?" Trevor said in response. He raised one of his fists and his knuckles were flaked with scabs and dry blood, probably from his countless other fights. "You want some of this too?" "Why are you defending him?" Alan said. "Well, what if he's telling the truth?" I knew how ridiculous it sounded the moment the words came out of my mouth, but there was something about Larson's death that I couldn't ignore. His body had been discovered by a pond, completely lifeless. There had been no sign of a struggle, and so far no official statement on his death. What if something had gotten Larson? Something terrible like out of a nightmare or a campfire story. Something that lurks in the dark but glows when it wants to be seen. I know this sounds crazy, I said, but I ran into Larson before he died. He said he told me that he saw his dead dog. He said his dog had been glowing. You started that, Alan said, raising an eyebrow. I thought it was just another BS rumor floating around. It's true, I said defensively. I did run into Larson and he did tell me that. And now Caleb is saying something similar. Well, because he heard the rumor, Trevor interjected. He heard about what Larson said and how he's trying to spin his own BS on it to rile people up. I don't doubt that you did run into Larson, Alan said to me, and I believe he did tell you that he saw his dead dog. Maybe he was onto something. Maybe he was messing with you, who knows? There's a lot that we don't know about Hal Larson, only that he didn't deserve to die. But Summers here, Summers I don't believe. Summers is a parasite and he was trying to disrupt the vigil. That I can't let stand. But what if Caleb is telling the truth too? I said thoughtfully. And what if Larson really did see his dead dog, and he went looking for it and then it got him? And maybe not that same thing that got Larson is pretending to be Larson. Again, I was painfully aware of how ridiculous it all sounded. Do you hear what you're saying? Trevor said. Larson got done in by something pretending to be his dead dog. You're worse than Summers, at least he knows that he's full of it. I admit it sounds far-fetched, Chester said, but I've heard of strange things like this back in Louisiana. There are folklore, legends and such. Yeah, and maybe the boogeyman is real too, Trevor said mockingly. In fact, I think that I saw Sandy Claus last year. Only he wasn't delivering presents. He was stooping a hooker behind the convenience store. Ho ho ho. I don't buy any of it, Alan said. You're just trying to prevent the inevitable. Summers was gonna get his butt beat sooner or later. Stop protecting him. Well, why don't we just go and check it out, Owen said. He had been quiet for a while and I could tell that he was having trouble with the situation. He didn't like Summers, but Owen wasn't a bad guy, and he wouldn't want somebody getting beat up like this, especially if they were telling the truth. Maybe Summers is lying or maybe he isn't. There's only one way to find out, isn't there? Let's just go to the park and see if anything's there. No one said anything. The only sound was Caleb's pitiful wheezing. And then a look came over Alan. It was a look of regret and shame, as if he finally realized what he and Trevor had been doing. He looked down at Caleb's bloody figure and winced. He looked more like a Boy Scout I knew him to be. Fine, Alan said soberly. We'll check it out. He even bent down and helped Caleb to his feet. Caleb tried to push away, but Trevor latched one of his arms around him. But if there aren't any dead dogs or glowing boys, Trevor said, and another mad smile crossed his face, then we'll really give you something to talk about, Summers. The six of us made our way out on one of the school's side entrances. We were away from the vigil, which was still going strong. I could hear the sound of the school choir singing. On this side of the neighborhood, there wasn't anybody else in sight. We walked down with Alan and Trevor in the vanguard, Chester and Caleb in the middle, and Owen and I in the rear. For all the beatings that he had taken, Caleb was walking strong and seemed more composed now. Alan and Trevor would continuously look back at Caleb to make sure that he didn't try to run away. Do you really believe this? Owen asked me quietly. I don't know, I said, but it didn't sound like Caleb was lying. Yeah, okay, but Pete, if he isn't lying, what are we going to do if we run into this thing? Oh, I said a little pathetically. I guess I don't really know. Owen gave a wild bark of laughter, shook his head, and we walked on. Eventually, we made it to the park, and it was an eerily quiet night. So quiet, in fact, that not even the crickets were chirping. "Well, here we are," Trevor said. "Yoo-hoo, are there any glowing monsters here?" "I saw him," Caleb said. "He was here, I swear that he was right here." We looked around the park, but there was nothing but darkness. Trevor and Alan began closing in on Caleb like sharks drawn to blood. Could Summers really have been lying about it all? Is he really just a pest, trying to stir up stuff? Did he come to the vigil just to mess with everybody? To dance on Larson's grave? Come on, you said he was glowing, Summers. You said that you saw Larson and he was glowing. Show us it. Show us, or these guys are gonna break you in two. "Well, there ain't no one else here but us, sunshine," Trevor said. "Yeah, we're tired of your stuff, Summers," Alan said darkly. "He was here, I saw him," Caleb said in a panicky voice. Sweat had broken out on his face and the rivulet streaked through the dried blood. "Guys, come on," I said, but Owen placed a hand on my shoulder and shook his head. Hux was 6'3" and was nothing but muscle, and Madison had years of experience of getting into dirty brawls. I wouldn't be able to stop them any more than I could stop the sun from rising each morning. And now Caleb Summers was going to get his. "What's going on here?" We all turned toward the sound of the voice. There was a policeman walking down the road toward us. Caleb didn't waste a moment. With Alan and Trevor distracted, he immediately ran the other direction into the dark. He was gone in seconds. "Alan Hux, is that you?" the officer said when he finally got near enough. Every cop in town knew Alan Hux. He was the star of our high school, the pride of our little perfect town. "Madison, is that you too?" Every cop also knew Trevor Madison, though obviously for different reasons. "It's me, sir," Alan said. "What are you boys doing out here?" the officer said, eyeing the five of us suspiciously. He seemed just as surprised as I had been to see Hux and Madison together. "We just left the vigil," Alan said. "We're all heading home." "Is that right?" the cop said, scratching his nose. "Who was that other boy that I saw, the one that ran off?" "Other boy?" Madison said innocently. "What other boy? You fellas see another boy here." He looked at us and there was a glare in his eyes, a glare that said, "Don't you say a thing." All right, enough, Madison," the officer said somewhat darkly. "I sure as heck don't know what's going on here, but you boys go home now. There's no curfew yet, but that may change. Go on now." The officer made a shooing motion with the back of his hand, and the five of us started down the road. Eventually, Alan and Trevor split off from us and disappeared like rays into the night. "You almost made me believe, Pete," Owen said when it was just the three of us left. "Can you imagine if something had shown up in the park?" "It'll only get worse for Summers now," Chester said bleakly. "Hux and Madison won't let this go. They'll tell others what Summers said tonight, and it's gonna get real bad for him." "He needs to stop stirring stuff up," Owen said. "I mean, coming to Larson's vigil tonight saying the things that he said. What did he think was going to happen?" At that, Chester and I merely shook our heads. What had Caleb Summers been thinking? What did he hope to achieve by being such an annoying pest? Was it some kind of retaliation for the way that he had been treated by the others this week? Didn't he realize that he was making things infinitely worse? Why would he lie about seeing Larson in the park? And couldn't he feel the fervor that was taking over the school, the town even? Didn't he know people were upset about Larson's death, not just the tragedy but the mystery of it all? Didn't he understand that Larson's death was a blotch on our perfect little town and people were screaming for answers, screaming for justice? "I saw him. He was glowing." Things did get worse for Caleb Summers after all. Hux and Madison told people about Caleb's antics at the vigil and word spread very fast. If he hadn't been already, then there was no doubt that Caleb was now public enemy number one, as far as our high school was concerned. More and more people started shoving him in the hallway, Teachers who would normally put a stop to that simply looked the other way. Once while walking down the hall, I even saw Mr. Rathers bump into Caleb. He bumped him so hard that Caleb nearly fell over. Mr. Rathers didn't even acknowledge Caleb. He simply kept walking. As for Caleb himself, well, he looked like a walking ghoul. His face and body were bruised from the beating that Alan Trevor had given him the other day. His skin had gone a sickly pale from all the stress, and his eyes were constantly narrowed, as if he was always expecting some sort of attack. He didn't speak much either. He simply kept his head down, only darting his eyes up every once in a while to make sure that nobody was coming up behind him. Caleb was once a lively person who would often say terrible or nasty things, but now he was like a scarecrow. A walking scarecrow that said nothing. A scarecrow that constantly looked over its shoulder, for fear of having its straw ripped out. "Did you hear what Summers had said at the vigil? Can you believe it?" "Yeah, he said that he killed Larson, admitted to it right out in the open." "I heard that he had a bomb on him. He was planning on taking everybody out right there and then." "Yeah, Summers said he's gonna do it again." "Who do you think that will get it next?" "Summers, man, watch out for that guy." "Oh God, oh God." Glowing? He said he was glowing. And worst of all, Caleb Summers was alone. He had no friends, no confidence, no one to protect him in any way. He was on an island surrounded by sharks, hundreds of them. Owen and Chester had cautioned me against trying to comfort Caleb or help him in any way, for fear that some of Caleb's would-be attackers would turn their attention to me, especially since I was the one that had started the rumor about Larson saying that he saw his dead dog. No grief ever got back to me though. It only ever was targeted at Caleb. I still felt bad for him, even though he had lied about seeing Larson in the park. But did he lie though? Are you still sure that he lied, Pete? Are you okay with what's happening right now? I wasn't okay with it. There was a part of me that still believed Caleb. Believed that he had seen Larson in the park days after he had died, the same way that Larson had seen his dead dog. There was something lurking in our town, lurking in the shadows, and it was preying on people, but no one was noticing it. No one but Larson and Caleb. It was Caleb versus the rest of the school for days on end. Caleb couldn't even take the school bus anymore. The kids on there would crowd around and gang up on him, and the bus driver would simply whistle and keep on driving. He had to run home at the end of every school day. Some kids would follow him on bikes and throw things at him. It was terrifying how quickly people had turned on Caleb. "We know that it was you, Summers. We know that it was you." "Yeah, what were Larson's last words, you killer? What did he say, killer? Why'd you come to the vigil, Summers? Why did you come to the vigil?" "Oh God, I think I'm next." Glowing, I swear that he was glowing. Yeah, somebody should just put an end to Summers. Through all of it though, Caleb never said anything. Never fought back. He took their jeers and punches on the chin. He simply trucked down like a scarecrow floating down a river. It didn't matter how many stones the scarecrow ran into, or how many branches it got snagged on. It simply kept floating down the river, even as it lost all of its straw. Eventually, Caleb ran out of straw. He was found dead just a couple of weeks after Hal Larson had died. His body had been found not too far from the park where he claimed he saw Larson the night of the vigil. According to the reports, his death was eerily identical to that of Larson as well. There were no indications of how he died and no signs of a struggle. He had a couple scrapes and bruises from his continuous tormentors, but other than that, it was as if the life had been sucked out of him. At first, I thought that maybe one of my classmates had taken things too far, that Huxer Madison had finally decided to give Caleb what he deserved once and for all, had decided to put an end to Caleb Ratboy Summers. But I knew that wasn't true. No one from my school killed Caleb, not directly at least. Caleb had been killed by the same thing that had killed Hal Larson, a thing that lurked in the shadows yet seemed to glow as well. A thing that could take the appearance of a dead dog or a dead schoolboy. But in some ways, maybe my school was still responsible. Maybe they had picked on Caleb one too many times. Maybe Caleb went searching for that thing that lurked in the shadows, hoping that it would put him out of his misery. In the end, it had. Caleb Summers was dead. After Caleb's death, our school closed down for a couple of days and a strict curfew was put in place. A strange thing happened after his death. It was as if the violent fervor that everybody had against Caleb had broke, and a sort of shame and disgust had come over my classmates. Shame for how they had treated him, yet even though their shame was clear to see on their faces, none of them would admit to how badly they had treated Caleb. Oh, poor Caleb, he was such a nice guy. He was an angel, wasn't you? Can't believe he died. How I hung out with him at Larson's vigil, nicest guy in the world. Let's pour a toast out for Summers, to Caleb Summers. Oh God, I still think I'm next. They're all pretending like it never happened, Owen said to Chester and I one day. We were hanging out in my backyard, and the curfew wouldn't be for another hour. Like Rat, like Summers, wasn't on top of everybody's crap list for weeks on end. We're guilty in all this, Chester drawled. We should have listened to you, Pete. We should have stuck up for Caleb, it all went too far. It doesn't matter now, I said gloomily. Do you think whatever got Larson got Caleb? The glowy thing, Chester asked, and there was clear fear in his eyes. I simply nodded. After that, Chester left, saying that he had to be home soon. It was just Owen and I, and for a while neither of us spoke. And then Owen said, "Did I ever tell you that I was best friends with Summers when we were kids?" I shook my head. It's true. Back in elementary school before you boys moved here, I used to hang out with him all the time on the weekends. Our houses aren't that far apart, and he got me a pop gun for one of my birthdays. Can you believe that? I still have it somewhere buried in my room. The strange thing is, I can't remember why we stopped being friends. It's just a blur to me, Pete. One day we were friends and the next day we weren't. One day I was hanging out with him and the next day I was hanging out with you and Chester. Why do kids stop being friends with each other? Why do they stop, Pete? When did he stop being Caleb Summers to me and become Rat Boy? I wish I could say sorry to him. God, I'm so sorry. I'm sorry too, was all that I could say. Eventually, Owen laughed. It got dark and curfew set in. The stars were out and the moon was bright. There was a small open field behind my house and I was going to go inside when something caught my eye. There was somebody standing in the field. It was Caleb Summers, and he was glowing. "Caleb, is that you?" I said in shock. I hopped my backyard's fence and ran into the field. It was Caleb. His skin was white and there was a glow to him. He was waving at me and he was smiling, gesturing for me to come closer. I felt as if I were in a trance. I needed to get closer to him. I had to get closer. "Caleb, I can't believe it's you." And then it happened. Caleb Summers vanished. What was standing in the field instead was something black and oozy like tar with tentacles like a squid. It had red eyes and it glared at me hungrily. One of its tentacles made a swoop at me, but I quickly jumped back. I gave a shout and then ran back to my house. I jumped over the fence, ran inside the back door of my house, and I locked it. I fell against the door, gasping. I knew instantly what I had just encountered. It had been the thing that killed Hal Larson and Caleb Summers, the thing that lurked in the shadows of our perfect little town. I had only survived because it had mistakenly dissolved its illusion a moment too soon. Had it pretended to be Caleb for only a second longer. Eventually, our little perfect town went back to normal. School and life resumed. No one died for the rest of the school year, and during the summer, I found out that my father had gotten a job in California, and we moved away from that town. Owen, Chester, and I said that we would always stay in touch, but eventually that stopped and I lost contact with them. I haven't spoken to them in years. I never forgot about them though. or about Hal Larson and Caleb Summers. Part of me wants to go back to that perfect little town, see if Owen and Chester are still there. I wonder what they've been up to all these years. But another part of me is afraid that when I walk those streets at night, I'll see something glowing in the dark, and it'll be Caleb Summers waving at me. Caleb Summers smiling and glowing. This show is also sponsored by BetterHelp. During the holiday season, a lot of stress can be placed on trying to find the perfect gift for your loved ones. But through all of that, don't forget about getting a gift for yourself. So, whether it might be by starting therapy or going easier on yourself during the tough moments, or treating yourself to a day of complete rest, remember to give yourself some love this holiday season. With BetterHelp, your counselor is available 24/7 via messaging and for scheduled weekly video or phone sessions. It lets you skip the awkward waiting room experience that you would get in in-person therapy. It's entirely online, designed to be convenient, flexible, and suited to your schedule. Just fill out a brief questionnaire to get matched with a licensed therapist, and you can switch therapists at any time for no additional charge. In the season of giving, give yourself what you need with BetterHelp. Visit betterhelp.com/MrCreeps today to get 10% off your first month. That's BetterHelp, HELP.com/MrCreeps. We didn't mean to do what we did to Mrs. Westerfield. Mrs. Westerfield was an old woman. She couldn't hear properly, and we often had to yell out our answers so that she could understand us. She wasn't a bad teacher in terms of education. I actually learned a lot from her when I was focusing on my work. I guess it was her attitude that caught our attention. She called us toxic brats and repeatedly said that we were our parents' mistakes. I don't mean saying it like, "Oh, you kids." I mean she was looking us in the eye and telling us that our parents should have used protection. We thought that she was joking around at first, but then Nate Isaacs threw a paper airplane at her head, and she completely snapped, twisting around and telling him that he would amount to nothing, right in his face. Imagine an 80-something-year-old looming over your desk with a glass eye screaming at you. Nate thought that it was hilarious. We all did. It was so out of place. Sure, we were used to her scowling and grumbling under her breath, but she had never confronted one of us before, with such confidence too. She had all these stories of working in the government before she became a teacher. I found it hard to believe that our ancient math teacher was a high-profile government agent, though she did tell some interesting stories. When we asked her what exactly it was that she did, she got tight-lipped and refused to say. Apparently, she would be spilling government secrets. Mrs. Westerfield wore the exact same blouse with the exact same stain on her collar every day. Jack, who was usually the teacher's pet type of kid, innocently asked if she was wearing the same blouse, and she called him a little runt. Granted, Jack Torres did look like a sewer rat, though this set us off into full-blown hysterics, and the madder she became, the funnier it was. And so the teasing began. I can confidently say the main culprit was Nate himself. We weren't the type of class who were supposed to get along, and Nate Isaacs was definitely the quiet type of kid who sat at the back and listened to his music. Mrs. Westerfield had affected him though. She had an effect on all of us. I had never been a bully. I mean, none of us had. Sure, I had witnessed it in small doses, but I had never been one. Mrs. Westerfield changed that. I like to think that she was a witch. That she was the one who made us act like that, which set off the events leading to her death. Because no matter who we were outside of our fourth period math, we all came together with a mutual hate for our sociopathic math teacher. It wasn't really hate. I never hated Mrs. Westerfield. That's what I told the cops when we were accused of murder. Every school has its bad apples, right? Well, that was us, or at least what we were turned into. I'm not sure how to explain the effect that she had on us, and it was even harder to tell the sheriff, who just nodded and smiled and wrote nothing down. How do you explain a realistic type of magic? The type I was sure had been cast over us because none of us had a logical explanation as to why we acted like this, except for magic. It's like one day we were normal 16-year-olds worrying about global politics, the state of the world, and if prom was going to be canceled for the second year in a row. But then we were this weird tactical squad turned to fond family, and we bonded through our pranks on our teacher. I didn't really have a family of my own. I did. Mom worked nights and spent most of her free time on Facebook, and Dad just didn't come home. When Nate Isaacs jumped onto a desk one day suggesting gluing toilet paper to the ceiling with a slightly manic look in his eyes, you would think a group of 17-year-olds would roll their eyes and tell him to stop acting like a baby. Except no. Nate had become our unofficial leader. If I talk about this effect like some kind of disease, maybe it will help me get the message across. Because that is what it felt like. Do you know that giddy feeling you got as a kid? It was like that, but tenfold, like being high. I didn't think logically. I didn't judge anyone or laugh at their stupidity. It was exactly like being a carefree kid again, uncaring and completely wild with no sense of right or wrong. Sometimes I would catch myself scribbling on our whiteboard, laughing with the others, and it would hit me in a rush of clarity. What was I doing? Before that fog would take over again and I was lost to the clouds in the idea that what we were doing was hilarious. There were moments when I started to question if something was in the air. Maybe it was the time that Nate Isaacs instigated a paint fight. Nate was not the type to act like this. He was radio silent in every class. He was smart and spoke like he had been chewing on a dictionary. Mrs. Westerfield's fourth period math, however, it was almost like he was in some manic trance, becoming the class clown. He looked funny, a fully grown guy jumping around on a desk like a kid, laughing hysterically while gluing scraps of toilet paper to the ceiling must be alarming to some people, right? But to us, this weird effect was spreading. I joined in with the others until we had successfully ruined the ceiling and almost given our teacher a coronary. I think it was the thrill of seeing her reactions. Initially, it was anger. She screamed at us, which made us laugh even more. But then it became annoyance, which gradually turned to psycho. And so we kept doing it, this time with pen lids. We started off small, and as these pranks grew more frequent, we started hanging out together more. On Tuesday nights, we would gather at the diner and share milkshakes, brainstorming our next prank. There was nothing else to do in our small town except watch a movie or go to the park. Our base of operations was at the town diner, and when we were exposed by a snitch, we moved to the town lake. In summer, we dragged along picnic baskets in our swimsuits, and in the fall, we gathered around a campfire and told scary stories. It started off innocently. We weren't technically doing anything wrong. I was surprised that she didn't tell the principal after the toilet paper incident. It was Nate's idea to fake a zombie outbreak. We had fake blood from the theater kids, and the group of us were pretty good actors. What we weren't expecting, though, was for Mrs. Westerfield to collapse when three of us, freshly zombified, lunged at her with bared teeth and fake blood running down our chin, pretending to bite out her throat. I didn't think that we looked that realistic. We couldn't afford eye contact and the blood was too thick. But I didn't think of the consequences of scaring an old woman. Things got pretty real super fast. Mrs. Westerfield had suffered a heart attack, and in the ambulance on the way to the emergency room, she had died. The problem was, though, I didn't remember any of this. My brain completely blanked from my classroom to the sheriff's station. Immediately, we were brought in for questioning and the spell was broken. It felt like something had been severed inside both my brain and my thoughts, a physical and then mental cut, like a bond being broken. I remember spending almost 8 hours inside the sheriff's station feeling like I had just woken up from a trance. When we were first taken in, the 12 of us thought that it was funny somehow, and we were still laughing like kids. But it was when we were told that our teacher was dead that was when everybody kind of stopped, and my brain turned topsy-turvy, a sour paste creeping up my throat. I blinked and the world around me was so much more gray. My zombie makeup looked childish and wrong in the mirror when I had to run to the bathroom to empty my guts. Catching my reflection was like waking up. I was Noah Samuels, 17 years old, and that's who I was. It took a while for me to remember that, for my name to come rushing back like for the last few months I had been an extra in my own life, a character with no identity and no name, just a bully in a group of clowns. Swiping away dried barf, I started to realize something was very wrong. I wasn't supposed to feel this foggy-headed. Inside that room, none of us spoke. Nate tried to, but he was told to shut up. He started with, I don't mean to freak anybody out, but... Jack snapped at him to shut up. He didn't speak again, though I was sure he was going to come out with exactly what I was feeling, what we were all feeling. From my place sitting on the floor cross-legged on cold concrete, I felt sick to my stomach. Reality was starting to hit and it was hitting hard. But reality didn't feel real. The months leading to that exact moment felt fake, like I hadn't even lived them, like my body had been on autopilot. We had killed Mrs. Westerfield. I caught the others' frightened looks. But how? Did we really kill her through our stupid prank? I thought about saying something because every time I tried to go back to that memory, to me standing over her body giggling like a maniac, something felt wrong. Like somebody had reached into my brain and threaded their way through my thoughts. The group of us were let go eventually. Mrs. Westerfield's family had decided to not press charges and we were free to go. But walking out felt wrong. I still felt like a murderer even if I hadn't technically done anything. Sure, it was a stupid prank that went way too far, but when I really thought about it, we had bullied our teacher to death. In this endless trance that I barely remember being in, we had been ruthless, cruel bullies. It wasn't just the fake zombie outbreak. We had made her life miserable. When I tried to think of what exactly we had done, however, I had either suppressed or forgotten completely. Things got quiet after her death. We stopped hanging out altogether, and some of our parents insisted that we attend therapy while others were grounded or worse, beaten. It was never officially said, but when Casper Croft walked into class with a blooming bruise under his eye, it didn't take us long to figure out what was going on. We started to slowly unravel as a group. Olivia started muttering to herself in the middle of class, swatting at imaginary flies. Jack, he kept getting answers wrong. Initially, he just scuffed up certain sums and calculations. He answered palm tree to a basic math equation, and then rabbit when he was asked if he was okay. When he was questioned, Jack acted like he didn't say anything weird, insisting that he had said the answer. Nate went back to hiding behind his hood and corking his headphones in. However, I noticed him wiping his hands on the front of his shirt a lot. It started off normally enough before he had started doing it frequently, and it's not even like he had noticed himself. Otis Mears, who sat near him, commented on it, and Nate just looked at him like he had grown an additional limb. We didn't talk about any of it. Not the strange blanks that we couldn't explain or our classmates acting weird. I'm sure we wanted to, but it's not like the adults or our classmates would believe us. They just threw phrases like PTSD and trauma right in our faces. Mrs. Westerfield was replaced by a man who had probably survived the Spanish flu. This time there were no jokes or pranks. We stayed silent and had to be forced to speak. The spell had been broken and we were left confused and guilty of an indirect murder without consequences. I guess we had made an unspoken pact not to say anything and ride it out until graduation. Our new teacher was called Mr. Hart. He was cold and snappy, complaining that we weren't lively enough. One day he said that we would be doing a specialized test on a Saturday morning. I thought that the others would protest, but they just nodded, almost in a daze, like this could finally be some kind of punishment. I remember my mom's look of confusion over breakfast. "I don't think that I've ever heard of a test on a Saturday," she said through a mouthful of orange juice. Ironically, after indirectly murdering my teacher, I kind of got my mom back. She started working less and paying more attention to what I was doing. Maybe Mom thought that I was planning on becoming some mass teacher-killing psychopath. She drove me to school and spent the whole car ride reminding me college wasn't far away, and that juvie would ruin my life. I sarcastically let her know that Mrs. Westerfield was my last victim. "So are you ever going to tell me about what happened?" she pushed. Ever since our teacher's death, Mom had been trying to understand. But I didn't have an explanation except, "I'm pretty sure that I was under a spell." Like drugs. Mom twisted to me so fast that I thought she was going to crash the car. "No," I said. "I mean actual magic." I looked up from mindlessly skimming through barely loaded Vine videos. The 4G signal sucked where we lived. "Magic." Mom turned back to the wheel with a scoff. "Sweetie, that is disrespectful to the deceased. You can't just say your teacher was a witch." Something cold crept down my spine, and for the first time in a while my blood boiled. I knew she wouldn't understand, and that's why I didn't dare tell her the truth. I had been having nightmares about that exact day, but each nightmare was a different scenario. In some of them, I was holding a knife grinning down at my teacher's body, while others I watched my cohort scoop her insides from her body with their bare hands, bathing themselves in it. Looking down at my hands, they were slick scarlet. Blinking rapidly, I swiped them on my jeans. Maybe I did need therapy after all. I shook my head of the dream that continued to creep on me. You're supposed to forget your nightmares, but this one wouldn't leave me alone. It felt almost as real as reality, and I had found myself pinching myself on multiple occasions. "Well, how do you expect me to explain it?" I snapped. "How am I supposed to explain not being in full control of myself, Mom?" Her gaze didn't leave the road. "Can you expand on the not being in control of yourself?" "I don't know," I admitted. I had a brain blank. The next thing that I knew, I was being hauled into the sheriff's office and my math teacher was dead. "Don't say it like that." "What else do you want me to say? She was dead, Mom. I came to at the sheriff's station and they told me that she was dead." I caught the rhythmic beat of her fingers on the steering wheel. Mom was pissed. "So you were taking drugs?" Her voice grew shrill. "You blanked out the ordeal completely." "No, that's not what I'm trying to tell you," I gritted out. "You know Nate Isaacs, right? The mayor's son." I straightened up. "Yes, Nate wasn't acting like his usual self. He was acting like a kid, Mom. I keep telling you it's like we were under a spell. Nate doesn't do stuff like that. His father is the mayor. I mean, why would he act like that? I don't know. He reads boring books with bad titles and looks down on the rest of us for breathing. He said like 3 words since freshman year, and I think she did something to him." I didn't realize that I was shouting until Mom held up her hand for me to lower my voice. "Can't you see what I'm saying? He started pain fights. He stuck toilet paper to the classroom ceiling and glued a card on his face just to get a reaction out of her. That wasn't him." Mom stopped at a red light. "You think your dead teacher cast a spell on your classmate to make him bully her?" "Yes." I caught her words and then her darkening expression. Outside, I glimpsed Haley Derry walking to school, kicking through fall leaves. She was nodding her head to music corked in her ears, her ponytail bouncing up and down. Wait, no, you're twisting my words. Uh-huh. I slumped in my seat. You don't believe me, so what's the point? I believe that you have an imagination. Mom rolled her eyes. Seriously, though, I can't understand that you thought you were having fun. But that poor woman was probably suffering, she sighed. I wish you were mature enough to realize that what you were doing was wrong. I bit back a groan. What would you say if I told you that I could barely remember the last few months? Well, then I would send you to a doctor, sweetie. Okay, I nodded. Well, I doubt a doctor would be able to diagnose me as being under some crazy magic spell. Mom sent me a sharp look. Noah, you're being ridiculous. If you were in fact taking drugs, you can tell me. I won't be mad. She caught herself. Okay, I will be mad, but at least I'll have an explanation as to why my son has gone completely off the rails and killed a teacher. She did that thing she always did when her lip wobbled and I was expected to feel guilty. Do you even realize what you put me through? Mom exhaled. I had a feeling weeks of pent-up frustration and fake smiles had led up to this. Mom wouldn't even look me in the eye when she bailed me out. I had to take time off and explain to my boss that my 17-year-old son had bullied his math teacher to a heart attack. Do you even understand what you've done? She was crying and then I found myself attempting to console her before she shoved me away. You should know right from wrong by now. She tightened her grip on the wheel. You've forgotten your contact lenses, Mom said. You know you get migraines when you don't wear them. I'm fine. That was a lie. I couldn't see anything without my contacts or glasses. I dropped my phone in my lap, my gaze flitting to fall leaves strewn across the sidewalk outside. You asked me to explain what happened to me and that's it. I don't remember half the stuff I did, and when I try to recall it, it's like picking through a dream. I don't know why I stuck toilet paper everywhere. I don't know why I poured aquarium water into her bag or pretended to be a zombie. It's messed up. Anyway, you didn't even care what I was doing until a few weeks ago. It took me accidentally murdering my teacher with my class for you to give a crap about me and look up from Candy Crush. Noah. I crumpled in my seat. Oh, sorry, Farmville. Noah, look at me. I did, turning to my frazzled-looking mother whose eyes were shadowed with sleep circles. You keep talking about how it affected you. You haven't once mentioned your teacher's family or Mrs. Westerfield's feelings. You didn't even ask to offer your grievances. I'm sure that would go well. It's not that you didn't go, Noah, it's that you never even offered. That the thought never crossed your mind. Mom didn't sound angry, she sounded upset. I hated when she got upset because my facade started to crumble too. I wanted her to understand that I thought I was going crazy and that I wasn't a bad person. I had been trying to convince myself of a lot of things, that I wasn't crazy or that I had no ill intent towards my teacher. Except I didn't know. This version of me that had been living my life, casually bullying Mrs. Westerfield, was like a shadow, a shell with my face. I was starting to spiral. I found myself rubbing my hands on my jeans, my stomach twisting, chest tightening. I had to get it off was all I could think. I had to get it off. I felt filthy and wrong, and every time I dared glance down my hands, they felt wet and warm. Before Mom could give me a grand speech on getting help, I climbed out of the car and slammed the door shut before she could wind the window down. I saw her attempt to try and say something, but Mom just turned back to the wheel, her expression crumbling. She drove away before I could tell her that I was terrified of my own mind and what I had really done to my teacher. Because the terrifying reality was that we didn't know. All we knew was that she was dead and the family didn't want to disclose any details. When I arrived at the school's gate, a security guard let me in. Odd, I don't think I had ever seen security. But it was a Saturday, so I figured I was just ignorant in a sea full of kids who thought the world revolved around them. When I was walking through the automatic doors, though, I glimpsed a large truck reversing into the parking lot. It looked like the school was getting some work done. I signed in at the main reception and was directed to the main auditorium. The school was eerie on a Saturday. It was darker somehow, light fixtures flickering over my head as I headed to my locker to dump my backpack and phone. The instructions were to leave all of our stuff in our usual locker and then head down to the auditorium. I was headed towards the staircase when a classroom door rattled once before going still. In the eerie silence of the hallway, shivers crept their way down my spine. I had a moment of, oh crap, is there somebody in there? And then remembered the janitor most likely did a deep clean of the campus on weekends. Still though, I found my gaze flicking to my hands expecting to see bright red. But no, they were just my hands, so why did I feel filthy? Why did I feel like something was caked into my fingernails? Before I could spiral into that territory, I made myself scarce, navigating my way to the auditorium with a twist in my gut. I couldn't stop thinking about that classroom door, the way that it had rattled once as if somebody had slammed their fists into it once, and then what? The hall was already filling up with my class when I entered and slumped into my seat right at the back. Nate was missing from his usual place near me. I hadn't seen the dude in a few days. There was a flu going around, though Nate wasn't one to miss classes. Olivia Reese was sitting in front of me. When I walked in, I saw her scratching at her arms and then bending down to claw at her legs. The skin of her arm was flushed red when she raised her hand, lips curled into a scowl. "Why are the blinds closed?" she demanded, tapping her feet against her chair leg. I had been wondering that too, because something was definitely going on outside. Mr. Hart was standing at the front, sorting through papers with a pair of white rubber gloves. Our teacher had been a germ freak, so it wasn't out of the ordinary for him to be wearing gloves. His wrinkled eyes were shaded with a pair of expensive-looking glasses with colored lenses. Mr. Hart never wore glasses. When he lifted his head, his lip quirked into a rare smile. "Do you want to be distracted, Olivia?" She shrugged. "I want to see the outside." The girl scratched at her arm again. "I'm not getting any vitamin D sitting in a dark room. I'm actually vitamin D deficient." The teacher nodded. "Well, you can get a note from your mother and I'll move you to a room with sunlight streaming through the windows in the next test." But, can we go to the bathroom?" Jack spoke up from the front. He had already offered to hand out the test papers only to be immediately shut down. Because I heard last year some kid from Australia held it in for the whole class and his bladder exploded. Like literally. He had to be airlifted to the ER. Yes, Mr. Hart began handing out papers, and a dull pain split down the back of my skull. A migraine. I could feel it brewing, glimmers of light bleeding across my vision. My teacher's voice felt like a knife digging into my head. Something prickled on my arm, a stray bug skittering across my skin. I brushed it off, swallowing a cry. Bugs? Was there some kind of infestation? "If you need the bathroom, you can go." I didn't realize that I had dropped my head onto the cool wood of my desk until a voice had brought me back to fruition. My thoughts were swimming. "You may begin," Mr. Hart announced. Except I couldn't concentrate. I was covered in bugs, but every time that I looked, there was nothing there. I could feel them. I could feel their phantom skittering legs running up and down my legs and arms, creeping across my face and filling my mouth. And the pain in my head was worsening, no longer a dull thud that I could ignore. The test began. At least I think it did. The room went silent. I was trying to blink away the sharp lights blooming into my vision. My migraines weren't usually this bad. "Noah, are you sick?" I looked up, blinking rapidly. There was a shadow looming over me, Mr. Hart holding my test paper. "Not really," I managed to get out. "I have a migraine." "That's not an excuse." My teacher slapped down the paper. "If you do not complete the test, you'll be suspended." The man's words didn't feel real, his voice white noise. There was just the pain in the back of my eyes and splitting my skull open. I blinked again and the shadow with Mr. Hart's voice blurred into one confusing mix of color. "I can't see," I said. "I can't read the test, so what do you expect me to do?" "To avoid being suspended, I expect you to grin and bear it." I nodded and tried to smile, snatching the test paper off of the man. "Fine." When he walked away, I bowed my head to appear like I was writing, when in reality I had my eyes squeezed shut in an attempt to chase away the light show going off on the backs of my eyelids. I don't think I fell asleep, though it felt like I did. I was back inside my math classroom in my zombie makeup, laughing hysterically over the body of Mrs. Westerfield, when something screamed. No, not a voice, it was a sound. The world spun around and round as I dropped to my knees, my hands pressed over my ears, the pressure slamming into my head. Peeling back my hands, my palms were wet and sticky, bright scarlet trickling down my fingers. I was screaming into the floor when it stopped. A voice sounded, but I didn't recognize it. The doors flew open, figures streaming through, and I was being dragged to my feet. Jack was standing in front of me, his lips stretched into a wide grin. Nate, Olivia, Otis, all of them laughing, their faces, hands, and fingers stained red. The figures around us did not have faces. I could feel their hands grabbing a hold of my arms and pinning them behind my back. This time, we were covered in Mrs. Westerfield. The sound of a pencil hitting the floor snapped me out of it, bringing me back to the present. Sitting in the auditorium, my stomach trying to projectile into my throat. I could still hear that sound, faded but still there, slowly bleeding its way into my brain. Not real, I told myself. It wasn't real, but I couldn't be sure. Whatever this was, it was either psychosis or memories that I had either made up myself or suppressed. I had my head buried in my arms, a drool pooling down my chin. I'm not sure how much time passed before I lifted my head, the pressure at the back of my skull relieving slightly. There were still lights, but I could finally see. In front of me was my paper. After a quick look around, the others were deeply embedded in their tests, so I grabbed my pen. Before I could write my name, however, I caught movement through the door at the front of the auditorium. I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me, maybe stray shadows in my eyes from my migraine. And yet when I squinted, leaning forward, I could definitely see something. Nate Isaacs. I could glimpse the bright yellow of his jacket. Nate was acting strange, swaying from side to side. It was like he was drunk. When his head slammed into the door and I glimpsed the explosion of red on the glass, I thought back to the rattling classroom door. By now, the rest of the class had noticed Nate. "Mr. Hart." Olivia's voice broke around the latter of his name. She didn't seem to notice our disgruntled classmate. I can't read the last question." "Look at the question, Olivia." "I am, but it's all squiggly." Another bang at the door as Nate slammed his head into it, this time stumbling his way through. He didn't look like Nate. He looked almost rabid, a bloody surgical mask over his mouth. In front of me, Olivia screamed and Jack leapt up with a yell. The rest of the class were frozen, their gazes glued to the boy. We were all seeing this, right? I think that was the question hanging in the air. Nate, the class joker and our former leader, was covered in blood, his jacket sleeves stained revealing scarlet. His crown of dark blonde curls was bowed, only for his head to finally snap up. This time I was the one who cried out, but my shriek had caught in my throat. Nate's entire face was drooped to one side, eyes half-lidded and vacant. When he pulled back his mask, his teeth gritted together in a vicious, animalistic snarl. I could see the bite on his arm, teeth marks denting his flesh. The world around me seemed to stop when Nate stumbled forward, swaying side to side, a feeble groan escaping his lips. Somehow I was seeing a real-life zombie in front of me, and my mind was replaying my teacher's death like a stuck record. I could feel myself slowly skirting back on my chair, my gaze snapping to Mr. Hart, who wasn't paying attention. Instead, he was sitting silently, shaded eyes on a pile of papers that he was signing. Jack was the first one to speak in a shrill yell when Nate crashed through an empty desk. Mr. Hart, what's going on?" The teacher ignored us, ignored the violent crash of desks flying forward. It took me half a minute to remember how to move, jumping to my feet and staggering back. Nate's expression was blank, lips contorted like he was trying to move them. I didn't know how to use a weapon. Until 5 minutes ago, zombies were fictional. I wasn't moving fast enough. Nate's head lolled to the side, empty eyes slowly drinking me in. He was lunging at me before I knew what was happening. His speed didn't make sense, fingernails gripping hold of my collar and forcing me backward. In the corner of my eye, Jack made for the door. He yanked at it, letting out a frustrated yell. "It's locked." I was half aware of Olivia trying to grasp hold of the feral boy, but she was too scared to touch him. His weight crashed into me and I found myself suffocated under strength that he shouldn't have. When Nate's gnashing teeth went for my throat, I forgot how to breathe. But he wasn't biting me, instead gnawing on my shirt collar. His hands clawing at my arm were trembling, breathing tickling my face. He was frightened, struggling for breath. I should have noticed it, but my mind was screaming zombies. There was something dripping down his forehead and beads of red pulling down his face. Now that he was closer, I could see bandages wrapped around his head, where something had been forced into the back of his skull. He was covered in blood. His jacket, however, was soaked in something else. It had a distinct smell. Tomato sauce. Nate's lips grazed my ear and I dropped to the ground when he told me to. I cried out audibly when he jerked his head to the camera mounted on the ceiling. "We're screwed." His voice came out in a slurred giggle. His breathing was labored, his body jolting like he had suffered an electric shock. Bright red dripping from his nose and ears. But not from the bite, I thought dizzily. Because the zombie bite in his arm wasn't real. The intrusion in the back of his skull, however, which had been clumsily wrapped with bandages, was real, causing slurred speech. Nate Isaacs was not zombified. He was dying. "They're watching us," Nate whispered into my neck. I could feel his jaw clenching, teeth working like he was ripping out my throat. "Play along." Before I could reply, he slowly got to his feet, swaying off balance. I blinked and I was back inside my math classroom lying on a desk. I couldn't move. This time, Mrs. Westerfield was the one looming over me, lips curled into a small smile, her gloved hands dripping, like she had soaked them in paint. "Drop." Nate's croak snapped me back to reality, and all around me, my classmates were falling like dominoes. Olivia fell to her knees and slumped onto her stomach, and Jack fell backward, crashing into a desk. Nate straightened up like his puppet strings were being pulled, slowly inclining his head. "Play along," he told me. And so I did, slowly lowering myself to the floor, pressing my face into my arms to suffocate my sharp gasp for breath. I found myself stewing in silence before the intercom crackled overhead. "You worked for the government?" Nate's voice was a choked laugh. I remembered that exact day he was sent out of the classroom for calling her a liar. His voice was being projected across the auditorium, like we had been the joke the whole time. I risked looking up. The present Nate wasn't reacting to his own voice. His eyes were half-lidded, half lolling to the side. Looking to my left, Jack was completely out of it. Wait, no, I caught movement, his fingers curling slightly. No, he was still awake, but he couldn't move. "Do you kids know the science behind bullying?" I should have been surprised by my dead teacher's voice coming through the intercom in her usual nasal screech, though my suppressed memories had always known that she was alive. "I've missed teaching you," she continued with a sigh. "Today I would actually like to talk to you about my job working with what we call chemical agents. This was back in the 80s, and back then we didn't really care what we did to people as long as we got results. I was in charge of testing beta agents on bad people. My job was researching how the human mind ticks, why we think as we do, and if it's possible to influence our own thoughts. Think of them like viruses. They're contagious, though it depends on how exactly they spread. I didn't realize that I was crawling across the floor trying to reach Jack before Nate's shoe stamped on my head, pinning me down. We had agents that spread through bodily fluids like Ebola and the Marburg virus. Agents that spread through water droplets like the common cold or flu. And then we had ones that were far more unique, ones that we were saving for, let's call it a rainy day. These ones could be spread through, well, anything, which made them deadly. Mrs. Westerfield paused for effect. These agents were used for more nefarious reasons, and if you don't mind, I don't feel comfortable describing what exactly we did to a group of children. However, I will tell you what they are. First, we have N7. I like to think of that as engineered anthrax. Anthrax, however, is a bacterial disease. N7's different. If administered in small quantities over a certain amount of time, N7 is completely undetectable and only recognized by the patient, him/her themselves. N7 works exactly like a virus, but instead of causing destruction to the respiratory or digestive system, it latches itself to the central nerves and brain. Mrs. Westerfield's voice was strangely comforting, almost like a mother. N7 is cruel. There is no cure, developed by an interesting and I might say psychotic mind in our own ranks. The purpose of N7 is to strip away the human of their humanity for interrogation. But darlings, times have changed, of course. The door opened, the sound ringing in my ears, dragging footsteps coming toward me. The virus will take control of your ability to process simple things such as reading or problem solving. N7 will tear into your neural pathways and begin to eat away at your memories, either removing them completely or replacing them with disturbing images that will make you question your sanity. You will lose basic human abilities such as speech, the ability to hear and process words and phrases, your memories, your sight. You will become a living vegetable that is only capable of basic survival instinct, as well as indescribable fear which will consume you completely before reset. I screamed when Nate stamped on my head, forcing my face into the floor. His voice felt like a live wire in my ear. "Stay down," he ordered. His expression twisted like the words themselves had caused him agony. I did, and my body instantly reacting to his order. Activation, our teacher continued, ignoring me. From the speaker, the center of the hive mind. I could tell the woman was thrilled by her own words. I haven't even told you about that yet, but you will, do not worry, kids. Essentially, the virus will reboot your mind completely. N7's very different from other agents due to its unique and I would say cruel mode of transmission and then activation. This part is very interesting and applies to you, so listen well. In the 80s, we had a certain protocol that we could not break. The speaker is our answer to that. It works like a king or queen, like an ant leading its army under the influence of Ophiocordyceps unilateralis. N7 is the closest that we have come to creating a human hive mind. Nate is my first speaker who survived the process. We used speakers as soldiers before disposing of them when they were no longer needed. But I made Nate myself. I think you'll like him, he's a lot better like this. After administering several strains of N7, he's the perfect guinea pig. Nate, sweetheart, why don't you demonstrate what a speaker is? I'm sure you've been excited to show them your skills. I could breathe again when the boy lifted his boot from my face. Choke. His words were like writhing insects creeping into my ears. I felt my chest tighten, all of the breath sucked from my lungs. I was choking. No, of course, you're not actually choking. But if a voice powerful enough with the new N7 strain takes over your brain, especially an infected brain connected to the hive mind, then your body will believe anything and everything the speaker says. She paused for effect again. It was like she was doing a TED Talk.
Now, if you would excuse me, I'll be preparing for stage 2 of this project. Stage 1 was research into why exactly we bully. What's the science behind it? Can we influence a mind to be cruel without a reason? The second is, of course, the effects of N7 on younger subjects. I would like to see how a group of 17-year-olds react when full activation is complete. And if they survive. Noah's a wild card right now. He did not touch his test paper nor look at it, which means right now he is yet to be activated.
She was talking to someone else, I realized. Sleep. Mrs. Westerfield was right. Nate's voice slammed into me like waves of ice water, drowning my thoughts in fog. This time it was an order and my mind started to fade, my eyes growing heavy. It wasn't real, I wasn't really tired, but the voice in my head had already tightened its grasp, suffocating me.
Noah, sweetie.
Mom's voice came through the intercom in a crackled hiss, and I felt myself jolt, my body writhing under Nate's control. She wasn't real.
You need to learn your lesson.
Mom's voice sounded real, and yet I was alone, curled up on the floor of our school auditorium, choking on phantom bugs filling my mouth. Nate Isaac's words contorted my thoughts, twisting me into his puppet.
Just do exactly what your teacher tells you, and this will be over soon, baby.
I did know one thing for sure. We were very wrong about our teacher. Today's episode is sponsored by HelloFresh. Whether your resolution is to save money, eat better, or stress less, HelloFresh is here to help you do all three. Say hello to your most delicious year yet with fresh ingredients and chef-crafted recipes at a price that you'll like, delivered right to your door. Each HelloFresh box is packed with farm-fresh ingredients, and everything arrives pre-portioned for less hassle and less wasted food. Don't let recipe boredom strike because HelloFresh has more options than ever before. Dig into their biggest menu yet with over 45 dinner options to choose from weekly. My go-to meal recently has been the pub-style shepherd's pie. It's hearty and filling, which is perfect for the colder weather. To get started, go to hellofresh.com/creepfree and use code CREEPFREE for free breakfast for life. One breakfast item per box while the subscription is active. That's free breakfast for life at hellofresh.com/creepfree with code CREEPFREE. HelloFresh, America's #1 meal kit. The Lakin's home. Upon first glance, it looked like a traditional 2-story home. In fact, it was very inviting on the outside. The house had a wraparound porch, white picket fence, well-established oak trees, cute little flowers dangling in hanging pots. It looked like the normal suburban American dream. That's where the normalcy ended, though. I remember when it first popped up on my radar. It was in the heat of the summer, and that particular day was sweltering. The family that owned it said it belonged to their deceased grandmother. They didn't want anything in the house and said that I could sell it with all the furnishings inside. It was rare that I even had clients willing to do this, so obviously I had questions. Gretchen, are you sure you don't want anything from the house? My words were nothing but sympathetic as I shoved the for sale sign into the front yard. Cool blue eyes stared up at me before reverting to the ground. I appreciate the concern, but the rest of the family doesn't want anything to do with this house, and neither do I. Curiosity swirled around in my head as I glanced up at her, swiping the perspiration that began to bead just above my brow. I silently wondered why no one even wanted to step foot inside. Had her grandmother really been that horrible of a person? Has anybody come to grab any of her belongings, though? The furniture's fine to leave behind, but what about some of the more personal things? I questioned. And crossing her arms, Gretchen sort of shuffled in place before saying, "All of that has already been taken care of. We really just want this house off our hands, and we heard that you're pretty good at what you do." A small, understanding smile tugged at my lips. I wouldn't push it any further. I'm sure they had a reason for wanting to get rid of it, and the last thing that I was going to do was pry. I was a realtor after all, not a therapist. "I'll get it sold." Reaching out a hand, I shook hers and offered a few words of reassurance before going about my way. That night when I came home, I kicked my heels off at the front door, tossed my blazer on the couch, and listed the Lakins home as I sat down at my kitchen table and ate dinner. The only thing that I knew about the woman that owned the house was that she lived alone for about a year after her husband had passed, and that none of her family wanted anything to do with her. For some reason, a part of me felt bad for her. Looking around my own space, I couldn't help but contemplate what would happen with all of my things if I had passed. I lived alone and my parents were out of state. I would visit them a couple of times a year around the holidays, but besides that, I didn't have a husband or children to pass anything on to. There is a freedom that came to living on your own, but everybody failed to mention that there was an overwhelming amount of loneliness that came with it too. I was successful, sure, but I didn't have anybody to share it with. And some nights, that was an unbearably empty feeling. And being in my mid-20s, I should have been easy for me to find somebody to fill that void. But these days, it was much harder than I had even anticipated. I had tried dating sites, but I wasn't half as good at listing myself as I was at listing houses. Cracking open my fridge, I pulled out my favorite cheap wine and poured myself a glass. As I lay in bed, I couldn't help but look over at the empty spot next to me. My hand stretched out and brushed over the spot, the fabric cool and smooth against my touch. Sleep didn't come easy that night, but then again, it didn't most nights. When I awoke the next morning, I shoved my feelings aside and got straight to work. And despite the strange circumstances surrounding the Lakins house, I was sure that this would be an easy sell. I wouldn't have to deal with coordinating with a homeowner to see when they could leave for 30 minutes to an hour so that I could show the house. And from what it looked like on the outside, I didn't think the house would need any kind of renovations. This sale should have been a piece of cake, but I couldn't have been more wrong. Hindsight is indeed 20/20. The second I received the key to the house, I was more than excited to see what the inside looked like. If it appeared as good as the outside, I was really in business with this property. When the key finally twisted and the door had unlatched, I stepped inside and I was instantly confused. Whipping out my phone, I looked back at these sellers' text messages, just to make sure that I hadn't misunderstood anything. Sure enough, the proof that I had been searching for was staring right back at me on my phone screen. This place was supposed to be fully furnished. Instead, it was completely empty. Shrugging it off for a moment, I decided to give the house a walk around. Everything was surprisingly up to date and looked to be in good working condition. Whether it really was would be up to the home inspector though. The light clicking of my heels on the hardwood reverberated all around the empty rooms as I roamed to and fro between each one. The kitchen was spacious, everything that a young family might be looking for. And gorgeous granite countertops, a sizable pantry, double ovens, a large stainless steel refrigerator, and various other appliances. Before I got a chance to really explore the rest of the rooms though, my phone rang. It wasn't a number that I recognized, but then again, I didn't think much of it. I was a realtor after all. I had new clients reaching out to me every day. "Hey, this is Eleanor." Holding the phone up to my ear, I waited to hear a response. "Hello? Pulling the phone away from my ear for a second, I glanced at the number and then quickly put it back to my ear when I heard a crackle of static and then humming. Whoever was on the other end of the line was humming some kind of strange little song. I didn't have time for this. I still had 2 other houses that needed to be shown, a box of cookies to drop off and some paperwork that had to be signed. Hanging up the phone, I shoved it into my pocket before glancing around the space one last time and leaving. When the last paper was signed for the day, I reclined back in my office chair and looked at the clock with a breath of relief. Switching on the lamp in the office, I straightened up my desk a little bit and dumped the papers that I didn't need into the shred box. Glancing out the window, I watched as black fuzzy moths circled the little lanterns just outside of the real estate office, all of them bathing in its warm, hazy glow. Darkness was beginning to envelop the parking lot, and it had been one heck of a busy day. One of the hardest parts of being a realtor was juggling everything. The first thing that I wanted to do when I left that night was to grab some Chinese takeout, take a bubble bath, and binge watch some American Horror Story. And grabbing my blazer off the back of my chair, I snatched my purse and headed out to my car. I was more than pleased that everything ran so smoothly and that I was able to get everything done. My showings went great and I already had an offer on both of the houses. I was sure those deals would be closed in no time. Both couples were already pre-approved for the loan amount, and the ones that wanted the first house I showed settled on paying the closing costs. It had been a productive day. That was until I realized that in my hurry to get everything done, I had taken that call and forgotten to lock up the Lakin's house. The minute my car pulled into the driveway, I threw it in park and raced up to the door with the lockbox in hand. The second that my eyes landed on the door, though, I stopped dead in my tracks. The lockbox fell from my grasp and my hand rummaged through my purse for my taser. The door was slightly ajar and the same humming that I had heard from that phone call could be heard from within the confines of the house. I really did not have time for this. And cautiously, I used the pointed toe of my heel to slowly kick the door the rest of the way open. The humming that I had heard from before grew deathly silent. There was a strange sense of tension that seemed to be filling the air, almost like a feeling of dread. With a quick glance behind me, I surveyed my surroundings for a moment. The sprinkler in the neighbor's yard was still spitting water, the sound of its spray hitting the sidewalk every time it turned toward the right. The leaves on the oak tree swished and swayed as a slight breeze drifted through them, the sound unnerving the eerie. Right next to me, the little white porch swing screeched on its old, rusted hinges, the sound a bit forlorn and sad. The whole atmosphere of this place had shifted since I had seen it in the daytime. Now it was unsettling. When I finally turned and stepped back into the house, I couldn't help but notice just how much it had changed. It didn't look like the house at all. It was as if it had morphed into something else entirely. My hand fumbled for the doorknob, and as I did so, my heart started to race when I realized that it wasn't there. In fact, when I turned around, all evidence of a door was gone, like it had completely vanished. Fear began to build deep within me, taking root and spreading throughout my body until it took all that I had not to panic. Something about the space was oddly familiar to me, almost as if I had seen it before, except it was different in a way that felt dangerous. The room was dark, but I was able to make out some stairs leading down to water, or at least that's what it sounded like. With nowhere else to go but down, I slowly descended the stairs, my ears straining to hear any kind of sound because of how dark it was. There were lights that flickered occasionally, and because of that, it helped me see the edge of each stair. I didn't know how far down I was going, and the last thing that I wanted to do was trip. After a few minutes of walking, I couldn't help but notice the temperature change. Pulling my blazer tighter to my body, I yelped when I noticed that I had stepped into something wet. Glancing down, I noticed that the stairs were now descending into water. A quick turn on my heel only proved to make matters worse. All the stairs that I had previously walked down were now gone. It was nothing but pitch black. Clenching my eyes shut, I tried to bite back my ever-growing anxiety. Every fiber of my being was telling me that what I was experiencing right now did not make sense. But my eyes saw nowhere else to go but down into that water. That worry only seemed to grow as I peered down in it. The water was a sort of inky black, and there was no way of knowing just how deep it was, and I had never learned how to swim. Forcing down the lump in my throat, I tried to push past my fear one step at a time. And kicking off my heels, I stepped down deeper and deeper into the water until it was a little past my hips. A strand of hair fell rebelliously from my ponytail, sticking to the side of my face. As my hand came up to brush it out of the way, I couldn't help the shiver that ran over me as I waded deeper into the water. I tried and failed to steady my breathing, the harsh inhale and exhale of my breaths echoing all around me. My legs trudged through the waters cautiously before I took one more step, and I plummeted below the surface of the frigid waters. A strangled cry left my lips as I thrashed around, fighting to keep myself afloat. But it was almost as if weights had been tied to my ankles. When I finally sank to the bottom, the need to breathe was so critical that I thought that I surely was going to pass out. My eyes burned, but my lungs burned even more. Ice-cold terror filled me as I felt my body succumbing to the loss of oxygen. When I finally gasped for a breath of air, though, I was surprised to find that I was completely fine. Confusion swirled around my thoughts as I peeled open my eyes and I looked around. And that's when I felt it. White-hot pain seared through my ankle as something tore into it with what felt like sharpened teeth. Looking down below me, I noticed nothing but a huge black hole. My body twisted and turned as some unknown force sucked me into it. Kicking violently, I tried to fight it, but it was like the more that I struggled, the harder it worked to tug me down. Down until all I could do was scream. In a matter of seconds, though, a strange sense of exhaustion washed over me, before my eyes drooped and my body went limp. When I finally came to, I had awoken slowly. Coughing, I sputtered out large gulps of water. My lungs burned and my ankle ached. Sitting up, I looked around me and noticed that I was in a nursery. Peering down at my ankle, I half expected to see a tattered mass of flesh and bone. I was pleasantly surprised to see that everything was fine. Running my hands over my clothes, I stared down at the fabric in confusion. It didn't even feel like they were wet. Besides my incessant coughing and the water that I had just thrown up, everything else was normal. Standing on shaky legs, I slowly turned and took in my surroundings. A strange sense of nostalgia crept up on me as I walked over to the crib. Little pink peonies danced across the wallpaper surrounding the room. As my hands brushed along the smooth wooden frame of the crib, my fingertips froze, coming to an abrupt halt. There, nestled inside the crib, was a baby. Its big, green eyes stared up at me expectantly, studying my features before it reached up towards me. Almost instinctively, my own hand reached down to meet its much smaller one. An overwhelming feeling of incomprehensible melancholy clung to me as the infant's fingers wrapped around my own. It was almost as if, "Honey?" Yanking back my hand, I turned to see a man whose warm brown eyes stared at me from the doorway, regarding me with so much love and adoration that it was odd. Do I know you?" Slowly, I watched as he crossed the threshold and approached me, his expression morphing into one of confusion. The second that he opened his mouth, though, I was horrified to see that water began pouring out in inhuman amounts. Panic erupted from within me as I scrambled over to the crib to grab the child, the need to protect it pulling at some maternal strings buried deep within me. The second that I peered into the crib, though, there was no evidence that it had ever even been there. Shuffling towards the door, I watched as it melted down off the wall and into the water like a thick brown sludge. With clenched fists, I pounded on the wall desperately, tears streaming down my face. This was like a nightmare that I couldn't get out of. But that's when I heard it, the faintest whisper of hope. "Wake up." "What do you mean?" I wanted to scream. "I am awake." And then it was there again, the tone of voice smooth and even. "Eleanor, you've got to wake up." And closing my eyes, I held my breath and waited for the water to once again overtake me. I could hear it sloshing against the walls around me as it climbed up higher and higher until it covered my head, and then it was quiet. Tumbling backwards, my knees buckled as I fell into the water. When I opened my eyes again, though, everything appeared to be normal. I was back in the house as if none of that had ever happened. Sunlight streamed through the windows and cast shadows on the walls opposite of them. A couple of leaves scuttled across the hardwood caught my attention as I noticed that the front door was cracked. Hurriedly, I wrenched myself off the floor and ran out the front door without sparing it another glance. The second that I got into my car, I peeled out of the driveway. I couldn't help but sob. Something was very wrong with that house, and Gretchen knew about it. All of her hesitance to even step foot on the property made sense now. I knew that no one would believe a single inkling of any of this, though, so I did the only thing that I could think of. I ran home, changed my clothes, and composed myself. I had to sell this thing. Within a week, I had pawned it off to a couple in their 20s. Some part of me felt bad, but another more terrified part of me was just glad to be rid of it. I knew this didn't make me any better than Gretchen, but I didn't know what else to do. I was so shaken up that just washing my hands of that house was the only thing that I could think of. About a month later, the couple had been reported missing. Guilt clawed at my insides the moment that I saw their faces flash across the TV screen. The house had claimed someone else. Heck, it almost claimed me. A part of me wondered what it presented to them. Did they get stuck in one of those strange, in-between places? Soon after all that, I quit my job and moved to an entirely different state. I still wake up from time to time, feverish and terror-filled, that house still coming to haunt me in my dreams. I often wonder why it showed me what it did. I wonder about the man and the child and what it all meant. What it did fail to mention, though, was that when I was 7, I had nearly drowned. And even though I can't recall what the pool looked like exactly, there was something oddly familiar about all of it. Almost like death had felt cheated, and that in some strange way, it was coming back to claim the one that got away. So yes, as silly as this all sounds, and regardless of whether you believe me or not, I used to be a real estate agent, and after trying to sell a liminal space, I quit. I am an avid collector, specifically items that relate to my lineage, the Romer family. To put it succinctly, wealth is not an obstacle for me. My affluent background allows me to obtain journals and such at auction, while my possessions encompass a variety of treasures. My most cherished collections consist of journals meticulously transcribed by my ancestors from generations long past. What you will read is the oldest of these journals, a glimpse into the past of my family. June 16th, 1789. The granulated sand yielded beneath my boots with a gratifying crunch. The relentless waves orchestrated a symphony against the shore. Their melodic crashes accompanied my contemplative gaze fixed upon the vast, unbridled wilderness that stretched before me. Glancing backward, I beheld the Constitution, gently swaying amidst the offshore waves. The beach sprawled with palm trees, their verdant fronds undulating in harmony with the brisk breeze. Upon the arrival of the second raft, my companions disembarked with eager anticipation. "It's colossal," exclaimed William, his voice awash with excitement. He pressed on. "What shall we christen it?" I regarded him, noticing his leggings dampened from the venture onto the shore before the raft had fully grounded. "Patience, my friend," I replied, my tone carrying a sense of mysterious anticipation. "Time will unveil its rightful name to us." We carefully maneuvered our rafts towards the shore, the rest of my crew rowing with determined vigor. The majority of the island's perimeter was embraced by sandy shores, but formidable rocky cliffs guarded the entrance further inland. We ventured inward, following a sweeping valley that gracefully ascended, granting us passage into the heart of this vast island. "There must be a substantial lake nearby. That's where we should establish our camp," Isaac suggested wisely. I nodded in enthusiastic agreement as we pressed forward, navigating through the dense undergrowth. Isaac's idea had crystallized when we had circled the island, passing by an awe-inspiring waterfall, one of the most magnificent that I had ever beheld in my life. Before long, we arrived at a clearing dappled with sunlight filtering through the leaves of ancient oaks and delicate lines of trees. It was an ideal spot, destined to be our temporary sanctuary. Through a narrow corridor of trees, a vast lake emerged into view, its pristine waters reflecting the grandeur of the surrounding wilderness. "Here shall be our abode," I declared authoritatively, and our collective efforts commenced. The symphony of setting up tents and preparing our newfound haven began an orchestra of industry against the backdrop of nature's splendor. A short span of time elapsed before our determined efforts yielded a newly constructed camp, standing proudly amidst the untamed wilderness. I stood at the lake's edge, gazing contemplatively over the tranquil waters, lost in thought. Henry, my trusted companion, approached me with a question on his lips, his eyes reflecting the longing for his own family. "When will our wives join us?" he inquired, the absence of his beloved weighing heavily on his heart. I pondered his words for a moment, considering our situation carefully. "Once we have crafted sturdy cabins for each of our families," I replied decisively, my tone filled with assurance. Satisfied with my response, Henry nodded appreciatively and retreated to his tent, hope flickering in his eyes. Turning my attention to the immediate needs of our burgeoning community, I called upon 3 of our most skilled men, Daniel, Matthew, and Thomas. Armed with muskets, they ventured forth into the wilderness, their mission clear: to provide us with fresh game from the island's bountiful wildlife for our evening supper. Meanwhile, the rest of us, fueled by the burning desire to reunite with our families, commenced the arduous task of felling trees. Each stroke of the axe reverberated with determination, our collective efforts symbolizing the steadfast resolve to create a haven where our loved ones could soon join us. The ache of their absence spurred us on, transforming our weariness into a driving force, propelling us toward the shared dream of a life together on this new, promising land. With each passing hour, our anxiety mounted. The day dragged on and still there was no sign of our hunting party. Nightfall brought a sleepless night, the darkness echoing our worry. As the first light of dawn crept in, our hope had dwindled, The absence of our companions left us in a state of uncertainty and fear, wondering what fate had befallen them in the wilds. June 17th, 1789. Awakening to the chill of the morning, I quickly donned my clothes and stepped out of my tent, my stomach rumbling from the previous night's hunger. Around me, the rest of my crew slumped lazily, their faces etched with worry for our missing companions. Just as I was about to address the day's tasks, two figures emerged out of the woods, one supporting the other clearly injured. It was Matthew and Thomas. Where was Daniel? We ushered them to sit and handed them water, while Isaac tended to Matthew's wounds. Their eyes held a mixture of fear and disbelief. We pressed them gently to recount their ordeal. Thomas spoke, his voice quivering with terror. We got lost, but something sinister trailed us in the darkness. He began, his hands shaking. It haunted us with cunning intelligence. It stalked our steps through the night. Daniel was at the rear. We heard his screams pierce the night air. His voice trembled, tears welling up. It yanked him into the shadows before we could react. By the time that we had turned, all we heard were his fading cries. His breathing grew rapid. It toyed with us, a nocturnal entity tall and gaunt. It's not human, but it's smart. It let us live, but I don't know why, he concluded, his voice trailing off in bewilderment. A heavy silence settled over us, the weight of the unknown pressing down upon our hearts. The island, once full of promise, now harbored a sinister secret, something beyond our understanding. We traded troubled glances, realizing that our survival on this island was not just a matter of physical endurance, but also a test of our mental fortitude against an inexplicable foe. Bearing a heart heavy with disappointment, I directed my men to pack up and rendezvous with me at the beach. I trudged through the thick undergrowth, a defeated air surrounding me. Oh, how swiftly our grand ambitions had crumbled. Merely one day on the island and we were already forced into retreat. Thankfully, I had the foresight to pack supplies for a possible return journey. Yesterday night, though, I had nearly consumed them, a decision that I was now profoundly grateful that I hadn't made. As I descended the valley leading to the beach, I gazed out at the waves, a glimmer of hope in this otherwise dire situation. Yet reality came crashing down upon me like a relentless storm. Our rafts, the lifeline that could carry us back to the towering Constitution, they were nowhere to be seen. Panic gripped me and I broke into a full sprint, my voice carried away by the wind as I shouted in desperation. My companions, their expressions filled with both sorrow and increasing fear, halted, waiting for my explanation. Amidst their horrified faces, a barrage of questions assailed me. Could we swim out to the ship? It was a futile idea. Not everyone among us could swim, and all the rafts had been brought to shore and had now vanished. Bringing the ship closer to the island would only trap us further. Yet the most pressing question loomed above all others. How would we endure the impending night? I pondered, evaluating our options with a heavy heart. We needed a plan, a way to defend ourselves against the unknown threat lurking on this island. Killing whatever haunted us had become a grim necessity, an unwelcome reality that we could not ignore. As we toiled under the fading light, constructing a palisade wall with walkways encompassing it, nightfall abruptly descended upon us, halting our progress. Armed with muskets, sabers, and knives, we stationed ourselves strategically, ensuring a sweeping view of the surrounding fields. Nothing could breach our vigilant watch. It all began with a simple exclamation. I think I saw something moving just beyond the trees. Swift reassurances followed, attributing the movement to branches stirred by the wind, and latter an exclamation about antlers, promptly dismissed as a deer. However, these sightings escalated in rapid succession, and as the night deepened, drowsiness started to cloud our senses. "Over here, it's approaching!" A cry pierced the night, and we sprinted towards the source, catching a fleeting glimpse of the intruder retreating into the woods. We stood there, muskets aimed. Lord, it's so smart. It crept through the shadows, slipping into our fortress through an unfinished section. Benjamin, brave but unfortunate, fell victim to its vicious attack. He fired a desperate shot, the sound echoing through the night as the creature clamped its jaws around his neck. In our confusion, we had believed he had spotted it in the trees. By the time that we comprehended the truth, the creature was galloping on all fours, its massive form galloping into the fields, crowned with a formidable set of antlers, and Benjamin locked it tightly within its jaws, his form limp. Just as the sun began to rise, casting yellow rays of hope, a creature's call echoed through the forest, originating from the other side of the lake. June 18th, 1789. It feels as though a considerable span of time has slipped away, more than the actual hours that have ticked by. We slumbered through the morning, only stirring from our restless sleep as the afternoon sun bathed us in its harsh light. Hunger gnawed at our bellies, a relentless reminder of the meager sustenance that we had consumed. With the inky shroud of night lifted, we took in the aftermath of the creature's presence. Stakes thrust into the earth, bearing the grim visages of various animal heads skewered upon them, marred the landscape. However, the most harrowing sight awaited us when we stumbled upon the lifeless form of Daniel suspended from a tree. Tenderly, we lowered his lifeless body and provided him a solemn burial beneath the shadow of a towering oak. A pale of fatigue weighed heavily upon us as I issued the day's orders. 10 of us remained, our diminished numbers a constant reminder of our perilous situation. 2 would embark on a hunting expedition, for without sustenance our chances dwindled. Isaac and I would scour the island in search of sanctuary or a means of escape. The remainder would labor tirelessly to complete our fortifications, the only shield between us and the mysterious nocturnal terror that haunted these wilds. Isaac and I ventured deeper into the wilderness, marveling at the untamed beauty that surrounded us. Despite the breathtaking scenery, the ever-present threat of the nocturnal beast lingered, casting a shadow over our awe. Muskets gripped tightly in our hands, I carved markings into the trees so that we may return. Each step, each sound, carried the weight of an unshakable fear. What if the creature defied its nocturnal nature, lying in wait to ambush us? We dared not take any chances. Our journey led us to an unexpected discovery, a burial ground, a sacred place adorned with rocks arranged in intricate patterns. The beauty of the sight was momentarily eclipsed by the startling realization that we were not alone on the island. Other people, the island's natives, stood before us, their torsos bare, armed with spears and bows. They surrounded us, their eyes fixed upon us with a mix of curiosity and wariness. At spear point, we were guided to the edge of the island, where a swamp spread before us, acting as a natural barrier against intrusion. We passed through the murky waters and entered a secluded section of forest, isolated from the mainland except for the swampy expanse. The natural fortifications of the land became evident. We were escorted through their camp, eventually arriving at a house perched atop a hill. Inside, a native sat cross-legged at the center, deep in meditation. 2 guards flanked the entrance as we settled in, anticipation hanging in the air. The man in the middle, his English accent heavy, broke the silence. "The beast is hidden your rafts, your sole means of escape," he said solemnly. I met his gaze and replied, "Yes, sir." It seeks a challenge in a manner of speaking. You must confront it as we have done countless times before. I stood awaiting further instruction. Currently, you are perceived as feeble deer. Transform yourselves into wolves, he declared. His meaning dawned on me. If we displayed strength, the creature might allow us to leave. He conversed with the two guards in a language unfamiliar to me, and then we were let out. They provided us with food and returned our weapons before guiding us back to the burial grounds, a familiar landmark from which we knew the way back. As the sun began its descent, casting a warm amber hue across the sky, we returned to our camp, an air of unease settling among us. I scanned the vast expanse, desperately seeking any sign of our hunting party. My heart ached with worry, whispering prayers for their safe return into the dying light. The sun, weary from its day-long journey, dipped below the horizon, leaving the world in the cool embrace of twilight. Anticipation hung heavy in the air, mingling with the scent of the food the natives had graciously provided. Night fell, shrouding the land in an impenetrable darkness, yet our hunters remained absent. Despair clung to us, its weight unbearable, for we knew the cruel fate that often befell those left out in the obsidian night. Silently, we stared into the surrounding fields, the night alive with mysterious sounds that reverberated through the air. My eyes caught a movement, a shadow striding on two legs in the distance. Instinctively, my fingers tightened around the cold metal of my rifle and I fired. The sharp crack of the shot echoed in the stillness. My companions rushed to my side, our collective breaths suspended as the figure crumpled to the ground. With cautious steps, two men and I approached the fallen form, our hearts drumming in our chest. Dread pooled within me like ice water as we drew nearer. It was one of our hunters, his eyes wide with terror, his hands cruelly bound, and a gag stifling his voice. The night seemed to grow even darker around us as the reality of the situation settled like a lead weight in my stomach. The monstrous creature, a nightmare-given form, launched itself at us with terrifying speed. Its enormous jaws, lined with rows of razor-sharp teeth, clamped down around his neck with a bone-chilling crunch. A sickening sound of tearing flesh filled the air as the beast pulled upwards, ripping a gruesome chunk out of his side. In an instant, he was gone, his anguished cries silenced by the relentless savagery of the creature. Panic surged through my veins like wildfire as I turned and sprinted, my feet pounding against the forest floor in a desperate bid for escape. Beside me, my companion matched my frantic pace, but he fell behind, his breathing coming in ragged gasps. With a terrifying swiftness, the creature snatched him up, his body disappearing into the darkness as if he had never been there. Meanwhile, my other friend lay limp and lifeless within the beast's merciless jaws, his body a haunting reminder of the horror that we had just witnessed. I managed to reach safety, my breathing coming in heavy as I clung to the shuddering edge of terror. Trembling like a leaf in a storm, I forced myself to confront the brutal reality of what had occurred. The night dragged on, shrouded in an unsettling silence, broken only by the echoes of our panicked breathing. Despite the absence of the creature, its malevolent presence lingered, casting a sinister shadow over our thoughts. We dared not lower our guard, our eyes fixed upon the ominous tree line, the darkness beyond filled with unspeakable horrors. June 19th, 1789. Only 6 of us remained now, a mere shadow of the men that we had arrived with. Terrified, we clung to one another, our eyes haunted by the horrors that lurked in the enveloping darkness. The morning had brought its own nightmare, the necessity to amputate Matthew's leg, the injury inflicted by the creature now festering with infection. The ordeal was a grotesque dance with death, the agony of the decision cutting deeper than any physical pain. I shuddered at the choice that had been forced upon us, torn between the brutality of nature and the desperate struggle for survival. The memory of that monstrous creature, its savage eyes reflecting the madness within, still haunted my waking hours. I had witnessed it up close, its ravenous hunger tearing my friends apart. The mere thought of its presence sent shivers down my spine. It was as if the beast had chosen me as its final prey, its sinister intelligence preserving me for the ultimate horror. The knowledge that it toyed with us, stringing up the bodies of our fallen companions like macabre decorations, fueled the flames of our fear. It twisted our minds, making us question our own sanity, whispering doubts into the very fabric of our thoughts. We buried our fallen comrades beneath the sheltering branches of the ancient oak, their resting place a grim reminder of the fate that awaited us all. The dream of creating a flourishing community, of establishing a plantation on this untouched land, had crumbled into ashes. How naive I had been, leading my men unwittingly into this trap. We were no more than deer fleeing from a relentless predator, our hunter a cunning and merciless wolf. Sitting on the beach, the same stretch of sand where my departed companions had once dreamed of a prosperous life on this island, I gazed out at the Constitution swaying gently in the ocean's embrace. It stood there, a distant beacon of civilization, both a promise and a taunt. None among us could swim, a fact that I wouldn't be surprised if the creature had cunningly deduced. The ship, beautiful and unreachable, became our symbol of hope, a glimmering reminder of the world that we had been torn away from. Yet, even as it stood so tantalizingly close, its distant allure seemed like a cruel mockery. I doubted that I would ever set foot on its weathered deck, condemned to the island's clutches, a prisoner of this savage wilderness. I returned to our camp, a heavy shroud of unease and terror hanging in the air, casting a pall over our diminishing morale. As the leader, I felt the weight of responsibility pressing upon my shoulders, urging me to bolster the spirits of those who remained. Gathering the survivors around me, I delivered a speech, each word laden with the urgency of our situation, trying to ignite the flickering flames of hope within their weary hearts. If we passively await the nightly onslaught of this beast, it will methodically pick us off, stringing us up like the unfortunate souls before us, I declared, my voice resonating with both determination and desperation. We must become the hunters, confront this malevolent force, and reclaim the power that it has stolen from us. We are not mere prey, we are warriors, and it's high time we show this creature the strength of our resolve. Silence hung in the air after my words, heavy with the acknowledgement that remaining idle was not an option. With a collective determination, we packed up our essentials, the tangible remnants of our shattered lives, and ventured into the foreboding depths of the island. Dawn painted the sky with hues of soft gold and fiery orange, casting an eerie glow upon the ancient trees that surrounded us. Led by an instinct to hunch born from fear and desperation, I guided our group toward the second part of the island, where the creature's haunting howls had echoed. It was in that direction that our initial hunting party had encountered the beast, so it seemed logical that we would find some trace of its presence there. We followed the serpentine path next to the Grand Lake, its mirrored surface reflecting the towering mountains that loomed protectively over us. Every step we took was a communion with nature's grandeur, marred by the terror that lurked within its shadows. I stole glances at the rocky ridge that skirted the lake, its majesty juxtaposed against the malevolence that we sought to confront. As I gazed upward, the tallest mountain, a sentinel of the island, seemed to touch the heavens, casting its imposing silhouette against the waking sky. Despite the terror, a part of me couldn't help but marvel at the island's raw, untamed beauty. In another life, under different circumstances, I might have wished to call this place home, but for now it was a battleground, a place where our struggle for survival played out amidst the awe-inspiring grandeur of nature. As we ventured deeper into the heart of the island, we stumbled upon a hauntingly familiar sight. A grim display of skulls impaled on pikes, standing sentinel before the entrance of a vast cavern. An unsettling mixture of terror and morbid fascination washed over me. The ghastly spectacle bore testament to the creature's savagery, a chilling reminder of the danger that lurked in its domain. Despite the paralyzing fear that gripped our hearts, a glimmer of hope began to flicker within me. Navigating through the very hunting grounds where this malevolent force prowled was undeniably perilous, yet the alternative, a direct confrontation within its lair, seemed a far better option. In that moment, a daring plan formed in my mind. If we could locate its lair, perhaps we could stage an ambush while the beast slumbered, finally gaining the upper hand in this harrowing ordeal. As the adrenaline coursed through my veins, a newfound sense of determination welled up within me. For the first time in a long while, a spark of hope ignited within the depths of my despair. With caution etched into every step, we pressed onward, guided by the grim procession of skulls that marked our path into the heart of darkness. Amid the flickering glow of lanterns, casting eerie shadows upon the cavern walls, a profound sense of insignificance overwhelmed me. I stood a mere speck in the vastness of the immense chamber before me, its yawning corridors stretching in every conceivable direction. The realization struck me like a tidal wave. We were now within the very heart of the creature's domain. Here, within the labyrinthine depths of this cave, it held an intimate knowledge that far surpassed its familiarity with the forest above, yet demonstrating our defiance, proving that we were not mere prey, remained paramount in my thoughts as we pressed forward with unwavering determination. Our journey led us into a colossal chamber within which a grotesque sight met our eyes. Piles of bones scattered haphazardly across the floor. Some were unmistakably human while others belonged to animals, their remnants now nothing more than remnants of a past life. As I surveyed this macabre scene, my conviction in the creature's intelligence deepened. However, what truly jolted me into a realization of its cunning was a chilling discovery etched into the cave wall. The word, "Hello," carved into the stone with deliberate precision. The cave's walls bore witness to more of the creature's unsettling creations. Crude sketches depicting the island, strategic plans for an attack on the natives' camp, and intricate renderings of the very cave system that we now traversed. Each detail was meticulously captured in my journal, a record of the horrors that we had encountered. Yet amidst the chaos of illustrations, one drawing gripped my heart with icy fingers. A ship adrift on the vast expanse of the ocean, unmistakably my own vessel. Below it, in crude, hastily etched letters, a single ominous phrase sent shivers down my spine. "Behind you." Amid the echoing darkness of the cave, the chilling resonance of Matthew's screams clawed at our ears, drowning us in a cacophony of fear. He was yanked further into the heart of the labyrinthine system, his desperate cries reverberating off the cold stone walls. In his wake, all that remained was a hastily fashioned peg leg, a crude testament to the horror that he had endured. The air was thick with terror as some of my men, driven by a surge of adrenaline, pursued him, disappearing into the depths of the cave. Others succumbed to their primal instincts, fleeing deeper into the unknown, their panicked footsteps fading into the abyss. Yet amidst the chaos, Isaac and I stood frozen, our eyes locked in a mix of shock and determination. The reality of the situation slowly gripped us, compelling us to action. Bravery that we knew was the only currency, that might earn the respect of this force. Ignoring the paralyzing fear, we ran, our footsteps echoing in the hollow silence, in the claustrophobic confines of the cave, where shadows danced eerily on the walls. We became the embodiment of unwavering courage, our resolve etched onto our faces like ancient ruins, a testament to the defiance that simmered within us. Meanwhile, the rest of our companions, lost in a frenzy of terror, darted aimlessly through the maze-like passages, their cries of anguish fading into the abyss. As we ventured deeper into the cavern, the atmosphere grew dense, causing my ears to pop from the changing pressure. Our footsteps, deliberate and cautious, resonated on the ancient walls, creating a haunting melody in the silence of the underground abyss. Emerging into a chamber, we found ourselves surrounded by a peculiar sight. Leaves, brought in from the outside world, carpeted the ground, creating an odd juxtaposition between the natural world and the eerie confines of the cave. It became clear that we had stumbled upon the creature's den, a place where the line between the wild and the primal blurred into one chilling reality. In the midst of our contemplation, a scream laced with unimaginable agony shattered the silence. The sound seemed to reverberate from all directions, disorienting our senses and filling the chamber with an ominous resonance. The very walls seemed to quiver in response to the unearthly cry, a stark reminder of the malevolence that dwelled in the shadows. Along with the haunting sound, an overpowering stench wafted through the air, assaulting my nostrils with the putrid mixture of decay and death. I dared to peer into a smaller alcove, hoping against hope that the source of this foul odor was merely animal remains. However, what met my eyes was a gruesome tableau. Flesh, most of it rotting, lay strewn across the chamber floor. My heart clenched with dread, the realization settling in that we were now deep within the lair of a monstrous predator, surrounded by the remnants of its ghastly feast. I prayed silently that this carnage was solely the product of the creature's animal kills, but the nagging fear of human remains lingered like a chilling specter in the back of my mind. In the wake of that most recent scream, a brutal reminder of our dwindling numbers, only 4 of us remained, our desperate footfalls echoing through the caverns that had become our dismal refuge. It was a tough truth to swallow. 12 vibrant souls had ventured into this isle, and now only a fraction remained. I couldn't shake the weight of my failure as a leader, my heart heavy with the knowledge that I had let down my crew, my friends, and my companions. We were trapped in this subterranean nightmare, ensnared in the very jaws of the creature that claimed this desolate underworld as its domain. Amidst the grim echoes of loss, we stumbled upon a small stream, its waters running with a chilling perfection. The liquid, untouched by sunlight for what felt like an eternity, promised a rare respite. Isaac and I, parched from our harrowing journey, eagerly bent down to drink. The sensation of chilled water against my lips was a luxury that I hadn't experienced in months, a fleeting moment of solace amidst the chaos that surrounded us. Yet our momentary relief was shattered by another scream, this one abruptly cut off, its echoes drowned out by the sinister victory cries that followed. It was as if the creature reveled in our fear, its cruel laughter echoing through the caverns, a macabre soundtrack to our desperate plight. With every bone-chilling cry, the realization of our predicament bore down upon us, a stark reminder that we were not the hunters in the shadowy realm. We were the hunted, pursued by an intelligent and sadistic predator. In the labyrinthine crossroads of the cavern, it came hurtling past us like a shadowy wraith, confirming my darkest suspicions. It was deliberate, methodical. It was saving me for last, savoring a malevolent game of predator and prey. I couldn't help but marvel at its cunning, how it meticulously chose its victims, moving from the most vulnerable to the strongest among us. Each phase of its grisly operation executed with an unsettling satisfaction. The creature's intelligence was a chilling revelation, a reminder that we were not just facing a mere beast, but a calculating and sadistic adversary that reveled in the psychological torment of its prey. Its actions spoke of a sinister intellect, one that took pleasure in the order and chaos of the hunt, turning the depths of the cave into a nightmarish battleground where survival was a fleeting hope. We stumbled upon the remains of one of our companions, a gruesome tableau of horror etched into the very walls of the cavern. His lifeless body hung suspended by both arms, grotesquely displayed in the dim flickering light of our lanterns. From the waist down, he was entirely absent, leaving a macabre void where his lower half should have been. Beneath him, a sickening pool of blood, intestines and viscera lay in a grotesque heap, a chilling testament to the savagery that had befallen him. The pungent, metallic scent of blood mixed with the damp, earthly aroma of the cavern, creating a nauseating atmosphere that clung to the air like a sinister omen. Isaac, his normally strong constitution shattered by the horrific sight, succumbed to his revulsion, his stomach rebelling against the ghastly scene before us. I steadied him, my own horror momentarily eclipsed by the urgency of our situation. We couldn't afford to linger in the suffocating darkness of the cave. We needed to move forward to find an escape from this subterranean nightmare, to seek out the elusive exit that might offer us a sliver of hope. The thought of joining the natives, once a glimmer of optimism in our dire circumstances, flickered in my mind like a distant candle in the blackness. Yet hope was a fragile thing, easily shattered by the relentless pursuit of the beast that haunted us. Lost in the depths of the cave, every step forward felt like a plunge into the unknown, a gamble with our lives. The beast, cunning and ruthless, was still hunting us, its echoing cries resonating through the tunnels like a harbinger of doom. We pressed on, driven by a desperate determination to escape this subterranean nightmare, praying that we might find a way out and elude the relentless predator that stalked our every move. The caverns trembled with the thunderous roar of a musket shot, its explosive sound ricocheting off the ancient walls like a war cry echoing through a desolate battlefield. The cacophony reverberated, amplifying the noise until the very stones seemed to vibrate with the force of the blast. The echoes twisted and turned, creating an illusion of a chaotic war zone and the ghostly remnants of gunfire filling the air. As the echoes gradually faded, a solitary scream tore through the hushed aftermath, reverberating like a chilling anthem of despair in the subterranean void. The sound, raw and primal, hung in the air, a haunting reminder of the horrors that lurked in the shadows. And then a suffocating silence descended, thick and palpable, smothering the cavern like a shroud. In that profound stillness, an overwhelming sense of dread and fear settled over me like a leaden fog. The realization struck with brutal force. Only two of us remained, fragile remnants of a once proud group. The predator that had ruthlessly claimed our companions was now on our trail, a relentless force of nature and darkness closing in. Every sound, every flicker of movement became a potential harbinger of doom, and the very walls of the cave seemed to close in around us, trapping us in a nightmarish world where unseen eyes followed our every step, and the imminent threat of the unknown weighed heavy on our hearts. Desperation gnawed at the edges of our sanity as we grappled with the haunting question of escape. Trapped in this maze, hope seemed like a distant star in a lightless sky. The winding tunnels and the cryptic twists threatened to be our eternal doom, but amidst the darkness a flicker of understanding had sparked. It was a revelation, a moment of clarity that struck like lightning. I clutched the journal, my fingers trembling over the map that I had painstakingly sketched, the map that the beast had drawn to guide its twisted hunts. My heart raced as I deciphered the intricate web of caverns, the loops and circles that crisscrossed beneath our feet. With a surge of hope, Isaac and I embarked on our harrowing journey. Running through the eerie passages, we panicked and followed the map's cryptic markings like explorers navigating uncharted territory. The shadows played tricks on our senses, whispering of unseen terrors lurking just beyond our vision. Each twist and turn, each fork in the path held the promise of salvation or despair. The damp, cold air clung to us as we pushed forward, adrenaline pumping through our veins. The walls of the cave, slick with moisture, seemed to pulse with an evil intent, as if they themselves conspired to keep us captive. As we pressed onward, driven by the fragile hope that this map, this newfound knowledge of our prison, would be our guiding light in the darkest of nights, gradually a glimmer of recognition began to pierce through the fog of our disorientation. We came to what appeared to be the entrance room, the very place where our nightmarish ordeal had begun. The chamber's contours were etched into our memories, the uneven floor, the looming stalactites above, and the haunting, hollow echoes of our own footsteps. It was here that our journey into the abyss had commenced, and it was here that against all odds it seemed poised to conclude. But our journey was not over yet, as we heard a noise come from behind us, and there it stood, bathed in the eerie glow of moonlight filtering through the cavern's jagged ceiling. A grotesque marvel of nature, the creature before me was an embodiment of primal terror. Its towering frame was crowned by a menacing stag skull, its antlers casting long, sinister shadows across the terrain. Every sinew and muscle of its lithe body seemed honed for the relentless pursuit of prey. There was a cold tension in the air. It was a standoff between hunter and hunted. My fingers inched toward the hilt of my saber, the weapon that would decide my fate in this encounter. The creature mirrored my readiness, its predatory instincts coiled like a spring, and those eyes locked onto mine. The seconds seemed to stretch into eternity as we dared each other to make the first move. And all of a sudden, as if guided by some unseen force, we lunged forward. I unleashed a primal scream, a chorus of emotions, anger, determination, and sheer will to end this ordeal. The creature too reacted with lightning speed, its gaping maw snapping shut, attempting to claim me as its prey. But I sidestepped with a grace forged in desperation and survival. My saber sang through the air, a silver streak in the moonlight, as it met flesh with a sickening thud. The creature recoiled, its eyes registering surprise as it gazed upon the gash that I had inflicted. In its moment of vulnerability, I struck again, a savage arc across its back. A roar filled the cave, a symphony of pain and rage. I found myself beneath the creature, our eyes locking in a deadly contest of wills. It wasn't merely trying to kill me, it was trying to break my spirit, to savor the fear in my eyes. But fear had no domination over me. With a swift, practiced motion, I drew my flintlock pistol from its holster and fired a single, thunderous shot into its chest. The creature released me, writhing in agony as I rolled clear of its hand. I watched as it struggled to its feet, its form contorted in pain. In a final act of defiance, I closed the distance and delivered 2 more punishing slashes, the cavern echoing again with its roars. Hatred and fear burned in its remaining eye as it staggered back, bloodied and blinded. With a frenzied determination, it retreated deeper into the unfathomable depths of the cave system, leaving me victorious yet forever marked by the horrors of that night. The first light of dawn broke over the horizon as we had reached the shore. A solitary raft awaited us on the beach. Without a word, we boarded it, our steps purposeful and resolute. Rowing towards the Constitution, we stood tall in the calm waters. We felt a mixture of relief and exhaustion wash over us. As these sails of the Constitution caught the breeze, propelling us away from the imposing island, It began to shrink in the distance, its outline fading with every passing moment. Grandiosia, I whispered under my breath, the name of the island escaping my lips like a fading echo. What was that? Isaac, my companion, asked, his eyes reflecting the same mix of wonder and horror that I felt. Grandiosia Isle. On the night of January 25th, 1980, the temperature on Nantucket Island, Massachusetts dropped below freezing. It was so frigid that it was almost unbearable to so much as step outside without a thick, heavy-duty coat and ski mask on. The wind whipping in from the Atlantic dropped the temperature even further, and the waves crashed against the shore with all the fury of Mother Nature herself. It's a night that old islanders remember well, because it was the night that Margaret Kilcoyne disappeared without a trace. An assistant professor of medicine from Columbia College in New York, she flew to the island a few days prior and was last seen dining with her brother and 2 friends, before retiring to her home in Tom Nevers for the night. The next morning, her brother had reported her missing. There were no footprints showing her leaving at all, no trail to mark her having gone anywhere. There was a huge search and rescue mission launched for her. Coast Guard choppers flew overhead, and teams of local and state police, along with island firefighters, combed the beaches, swamps, and woods for her. But she was never found, and the authorities told the press that nobody knew what had happened to her. Why am I telling you all of this? Because it was a lie. They know well what happened to her, and she wasn't the only one to disappear either, and it's time that the truth was told. I was a young man back then, only just having turned 28, having graduated from the police academy and served in the Boston Police Department for 4 years. I grew tired of the hustle and bustle of city life, as well as admittedly disillusioned by the senseless violence that I saw others inflict upon each other for drugs, money, or just for kicks. So I applied to the Nantucket Sheriff's Department in February of 1978. I was accepted, and I quickly moved to the island, which lay 30 miles off the shore of Cape Cod. For almost 2 years it was quiet. Lifelong residents welcomed me, though always kept me slightly out of reach due to being an outsider. It was something that I honestly didn't mind in exchange for peace and quiet. Island life was slow and predictable, and aside from calls about public drunkenness and dumb teenagers, there were no serious incidents. That was until the night of January 15th, 1980. I had just gotten on duty and sat down at my desk to take over on the night shift when the sheriff came striding out of his office behind me, a slightly worried look on his face. "Vincent, come with me," he said simply, and then turned to the other deputy locking up his desk for the night. "Johnson, you're gonna have to do some overtime work tonight. Stay here until we get back." I heard Johnson let out a weak cry of protest, but I was already moving for the door, grabbing my coat and following the sheriff out of it. The night was as cold as a witch's tit, and a light rain had begun falling. "You drive," he told me, tossing me the keys to a Dodge Ram Charger that served as one of the 2 Sheriff's Department cruisers. Slipping behind the wheel, I started the truck and pulled out onto the road. "Where are we going?" I asked the silent shape in the passenger seat after a moment. "We're going to Sconset. The chief of police asked for our assistance over there," he said, reaching down and hitting the switch for the lights, which bathed the world around us in a swirling glow of red and blue. Sconset was a small village at the easternmost point of the island. I frowned. In all my time here, the local police have always been able to handle the cases that came their way on their own. What's so bad that the chief had called us in? A small pit had begun to settle itself in my stomach, and it grew heavier as my unasked question was answered. "Brian Mays is missing." I tore my eyes from the flicking windshield wipers and dark road in front of me to shoot the sheriff a look. Catching my gaze, he slowly nodded. His usually light eyes now looked sharp and alert. Not saying another word, he turned back to stare out into the night. I did the same as my thoughts began to race anew. Brian was a fisherman, somebody who I had always been friendly with when we ended up being called down to the docks. A hulking but quiet man in his mid-40s. He lived with his wife in a one-bedroom cabin near the water's edge. As far as I knew, he had no disagreements with any other locals, or drank enough to wander off in an inebriated stupor. The fact that the sheriff had deliberately used the word missing troubled me, though I didn't know why. 20 minutes later, we turned onto the sandy road that served as the maze driveway. 2 police cars already sat out in front of the house. I could see Mrs. Mays talking with the chief of police. She looked almost inconsolable. Parking the truck and getting out, he broke away, leaving her in the care of one of his officers while he strode over to us. "Lewis, it's good to see you," he said, reaching out and shaking the sheriff's hand before sighing. "Though I wish it were under better circumstances." The sheriff nodded. "Yeah, the feeling's mutual," he replied. The chief turned and looked at me, nodding. "Deputy Codas, good to see you again, son." I nodded back. "Sir." The sheriff cleared his throat, signaling pleasantries had ended. "What have you got?" The chief turned and gestured towards the house. "We got a call about 45 minutes ago. Annette said that she had woken up around 11:30 due to a severe chill in the house and discovered that Brian was not in bed with her. She got up to try and find him and discovered the back door out to the beach standing wide open. She tried searching and calling for him for 15 minutes before calling us." He turned to me. "I understand you used to work in the city and you were pretty good at helping detectives track down missing people. Deputy, is that correct?" I nodded, feeling my professional mind kick into gear, something that I hadn't had to use since moving here. "Yes, sir, I was," I answered simply. He nodded, seeming somewhat relieved, and then gestured toward the open front door of the house. "Please, go join my officers inside. See if there's anything that we might have missed, because we can't spot a trace of where he could have gone. I'm gonna speak to the sheriff for a few more minutes." I nodded again and then turned away and strode towards the house. And behind me I could hear the 2 men begin talking fast in hushed tones, but I was already slipping into the old skin that I had to wear back in Boston, detached and clinical. Stepping inside, I shivered slightly. The frigid air had invaded every inch of the house's interior, the warmth that it once held long since stripped away. The lights were on, meaning that I didn't have to pull my flashlight from my service belt. 3 local officers stood in the tiny living room, conversing quietly with one another. They turned to look at me as I entered. "You must be Deputy Codas." The first, a tall, clean-cut man whose name tag stated his name was Holiday, spoke. "That'd be me," I answered, offering my hand to him, which after an odd delay, he took in a quick shake. I began looking around, taking in every detail of the room. My eyes were immediately drawn to the back door, which still stood wide open. I could see the pale white sand caught in the glow from the doorway. Darkness lay beyond, but I could hear the pounding of the waves as they slammed violently into the beach. "So, where have you looked?" I asked them. Holiday shrugged. "We've looked everywhere, Deputy. There are no footsteps leading from the back door outside, and the only ones in front were from them coming home. Nothing's been stolen from inside to our knowledge. Not that there's much of value in here, if I'm honest." He shook his head, pursing his lips and furrowing his brow. "That's not the strangest part, though," he added. I cocked my head. "What is?" I asked, still glancing around. My eyes slid over the small, cheap knickknacks lining the shelves, the ancient television set against the far wall, and the torn couch and chair set behind us. Like they had said, nothing looked disturbed. Holiday finally answered. "Mays didn't take any of his clothes." I started, turning to look at the man. "I beg your pardon," I said, another head shake. Maze didn't take any of his clothes. His coat is still hanging up on its hook, along with his hat, scarf, and gloves. His boots are still sat by the shoehorn. Heck, he didn't even appear to get dressed. His shirt and pants are still crumpled by the bed. He shot a look out the back door. If he's out there, he's in nothing more than long johns, and that's it. My mind churned as it processed what I had been told. I'm shivering while fully dressed in here. The man wouldn't be able to make it far without succumbing to the elements. But why would he leave like this, undressed and so abruptly? My gaze fell upon the kitchen where I spied the fridge standing slightly open, yellow light spilling out from within. I crossed to it, the officers trailing behind. On the countertop next to the fridge, the ingredients to make a sandwich had been placed. An open jar of mayonnaise and a butter knife stood beside 2 slices of bread and ham which had been set down. My mind put dots together, creating a mental picture in it. Well, it looks like he came out from the bedroom to make himself a late-night snack, I said, reaching out and gently closing the fridge door. I looked back at the living room and then walked towards it. He was making the snack when something drew his attention to the back door. I turned and looked at the shaft of light spilling outside in the void beyond. I could see the half-awake man in my mind's eye, slowly approaching the closed door. He got to the back door and opened it, and then I trailed off, staring at the sand directly on the other side of the door. No footprints were visible in it, just as the officers had said. One of the other officers spoke up, a short, stocky guy with a military-style crew cut. And then what? I continued to stare at the sand. Something about it looked off, something that I couldn't place. Finally, I shook my head. I honestly don't know, officer, I answered. It's like he just winked out of existence the moment that he opened the door. The man spoke again, his voice holding a small note of contempt in it. So that's your professional opinion. He winked out of existence like some sci-fi pulp novel. Holiday spoke up. Sean, easy, the deputy's doing his best at assessing the scene. The other officer, Sean, snorted but said nothing more. I took a step outside, making sure to step well over the area where any trace evidence might be. Pulling my flashlight from my belt, I clicked it on and shone it down and then around. The sand appeared to be undisturbed for at least 20 feet from the cabin. I clicked my light off, allowing my eyes to adjust to the darkness. At the edge of my vision, I saw the surf crashing against the shore, the black rolling waves seeming almost ominous with the present situation that I found myself in. As I stood there looking out at the ocean, a feeling suddenly fell over me, one that I hadn't felt since moving to the island, one that I had often had while working the beat in the city. It wasn't a welcome feeling either. It was the sensation of being watched, and by someone who had the worst intentions. I slowly stood up, my instincts flooding back to me as though I had never turned them off. I could feel the eyes boring into the back of my skull, as intense as I had ever sensed in my life. A shiver cascaded up my spine, and I slowly began moving my free hand towards the revolver on my belt. I kept my breathing slow and steady, but the feeling was growing stronger, as if whoever was doing the staring was getting closer. Mental images of times that I had had addicts or criminals attempt to ambush me tore through my mind, and yet the sensation felt different. It was a more primal response, if that would properly describe it. It was as though my body felt in more danger than it ever had back in Boston. Trying not to draw attention to it, I silently unsnapped the loop holding the gun in place. Behind me, I heard a single sound, the snap of a branch or piece of brush cracking underfoot, and it was less than 15 feet behind me. A new feeling fell over me, one that I didn't like. Fear. I didn't know why, but the sound coupled with the sudden silence that followed sent a waterfall of it through me. I didn't dare hesitate any longer. I ripped the revolver from its holster, whirling around and snapping the light on. At the same instant, I swear, no, I know that I saw a flurry of movement from the undergrowth behind me. I aimed both the light and the gun at the space, but when the beam reached it, it had already gone. I took a quick breath and then yelled out, my voice deep and authoritative. "Nantucket Sheriff's Department, come out of there with your hands up." I heard an explosion of movement coming from behind me, heard the officers, both inside the house and in front of it, begin calling out, but I stayed trained on the area, beginning to move around the side of the brush for a better view. Whoever it had been, and every part of me said that it hadn't been a simple animal, couldn't have gone very far. I heard someone call out my name. "Deputy Codas, what is it?" I heard Holliday's voice boom out. "Somebody's back over here. They booked it as soon as they realized that their hiding spot was compromised." I called back, not taking my eyes off the space. There was no movement now, but I wasn't taking any chances. Moments later, almost all the officers along with the sheriff had joined me, their weapons drawn and pointing at the line of brush. After a few tense moments of ordering whoever it was to come out, myself and a few of the officers moved in to clear it. We found nothing. Nobody was in the brush. Whoever it had been was long gone. I was almost afraid that I would be labeled jumpy or just hearing things until Sean, the officer who I had not gotten along with, called that he had found a lot of trampled and cracked brush, almost exactly 15 feet from where I had been standing. It confirmed my story. This put a much darker atmosphere over everything. We might no longer be dealing with a simple disappearance, but a much more nefarious case. Once we were sure that nobody was around, we gathered out in front of the house. Once the sheriff had guided Mrs. Mays inside, assuring her that an officer would be parked outside all night for safety, the chief addressed all of us. "Gentlemen, what I'm about to request of you all is of the utmost importance. This is an ongoing investigation, and as such, it needs to be kept out of the media. We don't need the newspapers and especially these stations on the mainland to get a hold of this. Not only could it mess our investigation up, but it would send the populace into a panic, and we can't afford that. So please just keep this to yourselves until such time I state otherwise. Is that understood?" Everyone else nodded almost immediately. I felt another knot begin to tie itself in my stomach. I didn't agree with the chief's call. Whenever we had a bad case in the city, alerting the media helped to keep the public aware and safe. I felt as though the chief were more thinking in terms of containing the damage than finding Mr. Mays, or the person who had been skulking around watching us. Even still though, I nodded. All these decades later, I wish that I had had the sense to alert the media and not let it get buried under the rug. As we drove back to the sheriff's station, I voiced my concern to the sheriff, who now sat in the passenger seat writing out a report on his clipboard. He nodded when I finished. "I understand your concerns, Vincent," he began, "but the chief has good reasons for choosing to keep a lid on such a sensitive issue, and they're the ones that I happen to agree with." I began to speak again, but he raised a hand to silence me. "There's nothing more to be discussed on the subject, Deputy. You are to stay quiet about this case, understood?" The tone of his voice indicated that it was an order and not a request. I simply nodded and then turned back to the empty road ahead. When the man spoke again, his tone was softer. "Hopefully we'll find Brian May soon, along with whoever was watching you. I can't see this going beyond a single case. Just relax, son." I nodded again, still feeling as wound up as a rattlesnake inside, but trying to let the man's words be of some comfort. Still though, I remembered the feeling that I had had out back at the house, the almost primal fear, the thought that I couldn't push away that, if I hadn't been aware and turned around when I did, I would have been attacked, maybe dragged off without a trace like Brian Mays had. I pushed the thought away. I hoped that the sheriff was right. I had hoped this would be the only case that I would have to deal with of this nature. It somehow unnerved me, almost scared me more than anything that I had dealt with in Boston. I actually prayed that night that this would be the end of things. And when I fell asleep to dark and disturbing dreams of the poor man being dragged away by a shadowy figure to an unknown fate, I almost felt that he would be right. Oh, he was wrong. So very wrong. 2 nights later, halfway through the graveyard shift, we received another call from the chief. Another person had been reported missing, this time from a home near the South Shore. A 23-year-old woman named Jenny, who had worked as a cashier at one of the grocers downtown. Her boyfriend had, just like Annette Mays, woken up to find it freezing, and gone downstairs to find the back door opening onto the beach, swinging in the wind pouring off of the Atlantic. When we arrived, it was almost a carbon copy of the Mays case. She hadn't taken any clothes, and it seemed that she had woken up to use the bathroom when she had gone down to investigate something at the back door. There was one difference, though, that caught my eye. A Russian nesting doll which had sat on a shelf next to the open door had been toppled from its perch, spilling at these smaller dolls onto the carpet. The sight of the spilled and chipped toy caused a new wave of trepidation and, yes, fear to sweep inside me. It's not much, but it's a sign of a struggle of some kind. Again, the chief told everyone, including Jenny's boyfriend, to keep quiet until he said otherwise. And again, everybody agreed. Everyone but me. I couldn't understand why everybody was so ardent about not alerting the general public to what now was no longer an isolated incident, but the beginning of a pattern. And when 2 more people disappeared from their homes in almost identical fashion in the span of a week, one an elderly man in his 80s and a teenager of no more than 15, the feeling grew stronger. I was toiling over the idea of anonymously alerting the mainland news, or even just the local paper, when the next call came in. It was another disappearance, but this one was not an islander, which surprised me. Not many people from the mainland came to the island during the winter months, but apparently this woman had. A scientist named Kilcoyne. She had flown to the island a few nights prior, and after falling asleep after a night out with local friends, her brother, some bigwig for IBM computers I learned later who had come with her, had woken up to a scene that I had become far too familiar with. When we arrived at the fancy house in Tom Nevers, I saw instantly that the chief was angry. He looked calm for all outer appearances, but I saw him gritting his teeth tight as he spoke to the brother, and then he strode over to us. "Another one, Chief?" the sheriff asked. He nodded. And of all people, it had to be the sister of a rich and well-connected city slicker. I started at the man's harsh tone. He's not going to be somebody that we can keep quiet like the others. He continued, shaking his head. The Coast Guard is going to be called, and somehow the media already had gotten a hold of the story. He shot me a suspicious look, as though he suspected that I had somehow been able to call the paper on mainland in the half hour since we had taken off. I shrugged, but inside, I felt a small sense of victory. I wish I had been the one who called, but maybe now word will get out. It needs to. We did our walkthrough. Again, just like before, the back door to the house stood wide open. None of her clothes had been put on, and no trace of her footstep were found outside in the sand. However, there was one difference in this case, something that I had noticed as I had looked at the back door. There, set in the doorframe just below eye level, were what appeared to be 2 or 3 deep gouges. They weren't that big, and against the other nicks and grooves in the wood, it might have not been noticed, but I knew they were fresh. I ran my fingers over the grooves, surprised at how deep they truly were. It was as if 2 or 3 sharp kitchen knives had been slammed into and dragged through the wood. For whatever reason, a shiver shot up my spine, one that was equal parts fearful and wary. I quickly brought the sheriff over, who regarded the marks with an odd look. It was almost as if he had seen them before, and he simply asked me to mention it in my report. As he turned away, I glanced down at the sand just outside the door. I was dismayed to see that, like May's case, like all the others, one thing that I had always noticed was that the sand by the door just seemed unnatural in the way that it sat, not looking blown about by the wind like the rest of it. I stepped out of the door and looked around. The wind bit at my face, and I turned away from it, looking out at the crashing waves. For some reason, the sight of the dark, churning water along with the ominous-looking dark clouds above caused me to shiver. A feeling suddenly swept over me, the same that I had had that night we had gone to the Mays house. The same feeling that I had had when we had gone to investigate all of the disappearances. Of being watched, observed like I was a fish in a fishbowl. I swung around, my head darting in all directions, but I saw no one on the empty beach or the nearby sand dunes. But still, the feeling remained and the same unexplainable sense of fear returned. Not wanting to stay out here alone any longer, I turned to head back inside, but I stopped. The nagging thought that I had been unable to vocalize about the sand finally clicked, and I looked down at it. It almost looked like it had been swept, I whispered. A few hours later, the state troopers from the mainland had arrived, and the sheriff told me to take the cruiser and head back to the station. Johnson will be there to drive it back here and take over for the day. Your shift is ended for the night. He began to turn away when I cleared my throat. Sir, with all due respect, don't you think that we should tell the state police along with the media that this woman isn't the one who's... He cut me off sharply. No, nobody will be telling either of them anything. That's an order, and if you attempt to disobey it, I will detain and arrest you. Is that clear? My jaw dropped open as I stared at him. His words had been the last that I had expected. The man shot daggers at me and then jerked his arm at the open front door, where I saw a large congregation of officers speaking to the chief, along with a reporter from the Island News. Now go and have a good day. And with that, I turned away. To this day, I still can't properly explain the emotions that ran through me as I walked outside and got into the cruiser. The closest I can describe was that I felt bound and gagged, a prisoner without shackles. As I drove back to the station, I began to give some serious thought about transferring off the island and leaving. Nothing about this entire situation smelled right. When I had come to Nantucket, I originally wanted to spend the rest of my life here. It seemed so different, so peaceful. But now, after the last week or so, it felt tainted. If anything, it felt worse than the city. The city had dope peddlers, murderers, and fiends, but you knew about them. This place felt like secrets that shouldn't be concealed. And worse, after the look that I had seen on the sheriff's face, it almost felt like he knew something, if not had an idea of who was taking these people. I had no idea that I would be faced with one final disappearance a few days later, one that would draw me into the most terrifying and horrific experience of my life. I wasn't even on duty when it happened. I had been transferred to the day shift by the sheriff who I was still on thin ice with. My shift ended at just after 10 at night, and I climbed into my Jeep for the drive back to my house near Sacagawea Pond. I pulled out a cassette tape from the tray under the dash and slid it in. The opening guitar riffs of the Rolling Stones, Give Me Shelter, echoing out from the speakers. As I drove, my mind became more and more firm in its decision to quit the department and leave the island. I turned onto a road that paralleled the ocean on the right, houses lining up and blocking the view of the beach. I just can't do this anymore. I can't be a part of some cover-up for whatever dumb reason the chief has. This is just too. I glanced up to see something run out into the road in front of me. No, not something, someone. Crap, I yelled out, jamming my feet on the brake and clutch pedals. The back wheels of the Jeep locked up, and for a moment, the world whirled around and my ears filled with the noise of screeching tires. And then the Jeep came to a stop with a lurch, looking back the way that I had come. I sat there trying to catch my breath for a few seconds when the face appeared, almost pressing up against the windshield. Gah! I yelled out, my hand flying to my personal pistol lying under the dash. But I stopped as I saw the panicked expression of the young woman's face, a girl no older than 16. Please help me, sir, she wailed out. Unlocking the door, I made sure the Jeep's parking brake was on before jumping outside. Immediately, the girl ran around the door and buried her face in my stomach. She was crying uncontrollably, and I could tell that she was almost out of her mind with fear. Still, I needed to know what was going on. "Sweetie, it's okay, I'm an off-duty deputy. Try and calm down and tell me what happened." Instantly, the girl's face looked up at me, and I couldn't help but shiver slightly, both at the petrified expression adorning her features, along with the words that she babbled out. "I woke up to use the bathroom and I heard my daddy downstairs doing something. He always stays up late. But then I heard him curse and something crashed. I heard breaking glass and wood, and then I heard something scream and hiss. Something horrible." She wiped her eyes with the sleeve of her nightgown. "I heard my daddy scream in pain and ran downstairs." Now she began to scream as she finished. "It had him and it was dragging him out the back door. He was bleeding. Please help me." Another shiver shot through me, but I pushed it down. "You have to stay in control of yourself, Vincent. Your first duty is to keep the girl safe and call for backup. Then you need to see if the father is still near the house. The girl is delirious and thinks a masked man was something else. You need to move fast." Nodding at my own thoughts, I guided the girl into the passenger seat and unlocked the door. Returning to the driver's side, I grabbed my pistol along with the spare flashlight, before reaching for the CB radio that I had wired under the dash. Tuning it to the frequency the sheriff's department used, I hit the transmit button. "Any deputy monitoring this frequency. This is Deputy Colonize, requesting urgent backup. Does anybody copy?" The voice that answered was Johnson's.
"Colonize, this is Johnson. What's going on? Over."
"Johnson, notify the sheriff and tell him to get as many local police out to my location as well. I just came across a panicked girl who said somebody broke in and took her father." I let the words hang in the air for a moment, letting them sink in.
"Oh Christ, not another one."
I heard Johnson breathe. I hit the transmit button again. "I'm leaving the girl in my Jeep and going to check out the house to see if the father is still alive. Get back up here ASAP." I heard him respond, but I had already turned to the girl. "Sweetie, I need to leave you in the truck while I go to see if your father's okay." She began to frantically shake her head, but I put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "It's all right, more police are on the way. Just stay in the truck and keep the door locked, okay? I'll be right back." And with that, I locked the driver's door and shut it with a clunk. I turned towards the darkened shape of the house the girl had to have run into the road from. Even from here, I could see the front door hanging wide open, occasionally swinging when a gust of wind came. A single light burned out from what had to have been the living room. Other than that, though, everything was quiet. There were no bird calls, no animals in the brush. The only things that I could hear were the pounding of the surf from the other side of the house and the creak as a swing bench mounted to the front porch swiveled in the breeze. Otherwise, silence. To this day, I can still recall the amount of adrenaline and fear that coursed through my veins as I prepared for what might be a violent confrontation. Swallowing harder than I usually did, I shot one last look at the Jeep and then began to walk towards it. As soon as I had reached the path to the front porch, I slowed down, the hand gripping my pistol now slightly sweaty even with the chill. I took a moment to breathe deep and then began to slowly creep towards the house, making sure my footsteps made as little noise as possible. There was still no movement from the house, but the atmosphere that I was picking up set me even more on edge than I thought possible. The air seemed charged and tense, as if the world around me were collectively holding its breath. And there was another feeling that I was picking up on, something that I couldn't place yet, and it was the same that I had had at all the other disappearance sites, except this one was 10 times stronger. Reaching the porch, I tested the bottom step to make sure that it wouldn't creak and then ascended to open the front door. The entryway was dark, but even in the gloom I could see a staircase leading to the second floor just inside. A hallway led around it towards the back of the house, and I could also see a doorway leading off to another room to the right. There's likely an identical doorway to the left if the layout of this place is similar to my house. I waited a moment, forcing everything except my training out of the forefront of my mind, and then I stepped halfway through the door. I had been correct in my assumption. A doorway to what seemed to be a sitting room lay on my left. I tilted my head so that I could see down the hallway. Nothing moved in the stillness, and I could hear the ticking of a clock echoing from the end of it. I took another deep breath, and then, as much as I didn't want to, I forced myself to follow procedure and call out, "Nantucket Sheriff's Department, if anybody's in there, please make yourself known." My voice sounded almost muted as it filled the house. Well, there goes the element of surprise. I flicked my flashlight on, tucking the wrist holding it under my gun hand, the yellow beam trailing up the stairs toward the second floor. I eyed the half-open windows at the top of the landing apprehensively. Normally, the standard procedure for a single officer clearing a home is to do the ground floor first and then move upstairs. But ever since I had gone to a domestic disturbance call 5 years ago, one where a man coked out of his mind had burst out of the upstairs bedroom with a shotgun while I had been clearing the first floor, I had ingrained it in me to clear the second floor first. Moving to the stairs, I climbed them quickly, thankful that, aside from a small creak on the second step, they didn't make any noise. The first door led to what had to be the father's bedroom, the large bed empty. The second opened onto a small upstairs bathroom. The third led into what had to be the girl's bedroom. As I saw a half-open closet on the other side, I chose to enter the room, crossing and making sure that nobody was hiding inside. Confident that nobody was upstairs, I turned and began to head back out to the hallway. But I froze as I spared a glance out of the window. The window of the girl's bedroom faced the back of the house towards the beach. It was dark, but the clouds had pulled back some, allowing the moon to shine down onto the sand and spill into the room. It provided enough light to look down to the ground, where I caught a glimpse of a darkened figure moving. It was only for a split second whoever it had been had stepped out of line of sight visible from the room, but it was enough. I quickly clicked off my light, feeling my heart begin to beat harder in my chest. I trusted my instincts, and all of them were telling me that whoever the figure had been, that it wasn't the girl's father. Moving out into the hallway, I trained the gun back downstairs. Nothing moved inside, but to say the air inside the house had taken on an even worse atmosphere would be understating it. Every darkened corner now felt threatening. Every gust of the wind hitting the windows made me feel that much tenser. Descending the stairs, I first cleared the sitting room, finding it empty, and then I made my way down the hallway towards the back of the house. I found myself in a long but narrow kitchen, the tile floor reflecting in the moonlight. This too looked to be clear. I saw a door which appeared to lead outside to the beach but turned away. I needed to finish clearing the house, and after seeing the figures skulking around outside, I wasn't prepared to venture out there alone. I couldn't hear the sirens signaling my backup yet, but I knew that they had to already be on their way. Just clear the final rooms on the ground floor, then pull back out to the Jeep until the others arrive. Don't be a hero and don't be stupid. Not after seeing this guy's prior handiwork. My decision made, I slowly walked back towards the entryway. The soft sound of the clock behind me chiming caused me to freeze for a moment, and then I reached the other doorway. The light that I had seen in the front window appeared to come from this room. What I could now see appeared to be a study of some kind. Books lined the shelves on every wall, and an ornate desk and chair sat in the middle of the room, papers piled on top. As my eyes flickered beyond the desk, where anybody could easily hide, a noise came from beyond, causing me to raise my weapon again. I saw a doorway that I hadn't noticed at first on the far side of the room, the door wide open. I crossed the study slowly, making sure nobody was crouched behind the desk before approaching the door. The room beyond was dark, but I could see a large table surrounded by chairs set up in the middle of it. A dining room. Moving silently now, I scanned the room. I saw no sign of movement inside, but something had begun welling up inside me as I approached the door. Every fiber of my being had been put on high alert, and I was cognizant of everything from the wind to the beating of my heart. Out of everything in the house, this room seemed to give off the worst vibes, and it was likely due to the fact that across the room, I could see the open door which led outside to the beach. I had just taken a few steps into the room when I heard a soft squelch come from beneath my foot. Freezing, I looked down, but I couldn't see much, even with the moonlight spilling in from the doorway. Weighing my options, I decided to quickly flick on my flashlight for a second to see what I had stepped in. I aimed the light down and, holding the beam with my gun hand, I flicked it on. To this very day, I wish to God I never had. As I had said, in every other disappearance that I had been called to, aside from the nesting doll knocked over at the girl's house, there had been no signs of violence, no signs of a struggle, nothing. Well, that was not the case here. The first thing I noticed was the broken dishes that littered the floor. Tiny pieces lay scattered all around me, as if somebody had grabbed the china on the dining room table and thrown it at something or someone. The second thing I noticed was that both chairs on this side of the table had been knocked over. One had the ornate wooden carved back broken, showing somebody had been slammed into it with great force. The unknown feeling that I had had at all the prior disappearances was worming its way forward, past all my training and defenses like lava bursting from the surface. The third thing that I saw was the blood. The dining room table had been placed on top of a large braided carpet which covered the wooden floor to keep the cold from seeping up and disrupting those eating at it. And it had been thoroughly soaked in blood. I could see the large stain that I had stepped in, and looking left to right, I saw that the table and display case for the china was splattered in blood as well. Instantly, I knew that the girl's father was dead. No person could lose this much blood and survive. The unknown feeling finally burst forth, and I finally understood what it was. Dread. I flicked my flashlight off quickly, suddenly feeling extremely vulnerable. This is far beyond any straightforward kidnapping or robbery. This is beyond the scope likely of what these people are used to. We've been dealing with a serial killer this entire time, and I don't care about the consequences. I'm calling the mainland right. I was snapped out of my thoughts by a noise, one which came from out the open back door. My breath caught in my throat, and I felt my heart begin to thunder in my chest as I gripped my pistol tightly. Slowly I raised my eyes. In the now bright moonlight, I could now see that the bloodstain turned into a smear, one that signaled something that the girl's father had been dragged. The smear led onto the wooden floor towards the door. Even from here I could see it lead onto the back porch and down the steps onto the beach. The sound came again, and I realized it was the creak of the back porch. I raised the gun and pointed it at the doorway. Somebody was out there just out of sight. I saw something move, casting a shadow which stretched across the porch and into my line of sight. For a second, I didn't fully process what I was seeing, and then it slammed into me with all the weight of a semi-truck. The shadow had a human-like shape to it, but the proportions were all wrong. Even accounting for warping by the moonlight, the figure seemed too tall. The arms seemed to reach too far down, and the shadow of the head looked misshapen. And then it moved. My blood suddenly ran cold as I heard the sound of it breathing, a wheezing rattle of air, almost as if it were fighting to suck oxygen into its lungs. The porch creaked more as I saw the shadow grow larger, and then a fresh surge of fear flooded into me as I saw a second shadowy figure appear on the sandy path to the beach. It wasn't directly in the moonlight, but I saw it begin to stagger towards the doorway, and even though it was far away, I got the impression that it had already spotted me. Oh, and there's more than one of them, my mind whispered to me. And then the one out of sight let out a laugh. I still shiver to this day recalling it. It was wet, gurgling, almost as if it were laughing through a mouth of seawater, and it held a malicious glee to it that chilled me to the bone. Nothing human could have let out such a laugh. That was when something snaked around the door from the opposite side. My eyes locked on it, and I felt all the blood drain out of my face. I finally managed to whisper out two words, barely audible. "Screw me." Dread and terror like I had never felt before crashed into me like a rogue wave. I only stood there for another second, and then I was running. I turned and bolted from the dining room, sprinting through the study as I heard another inhuman laugh sound from behind me. I didn't even give a second thought to using the gun. I knew that it would be as effective as the china plates had been against them. I raced out the front door and down the steps. I was halfway to my Jeep when the lights suddenly snapped on, blinding me and freezing me in place. "Freeze, drop your weapon." I heard a man's voice order. "Hey, don't shoot, I'm a deputy," I cried out, the delirium of fear racing through my veins, causing my voice to come out higher and shriller than I had ever heard it before. For another few seconds, nobody spoke, and I feared that I would be open fired upon, but then a familiar voice rang out. "Lower your weapons, it's my deputy." The lights lowered as well, and I finally saw that my backup had already arrived. I was facing what looked like the entire island's police department, plus the sheriff's department as well. I saw the sheriff standing next to the police chief, both holding shotguns. Stony-faced officers stood on all sides of them. I saw that a few of them had already retrieved the girl from my Jeep. A blanket had been draped across her shoulders as she sat in the back of a waiting ambulance. I frantically gestured behind me at the house. "They're back there, there's at least 2 of them," I said, my voice still trembling. I saw the chief and the sheriff exchange a dark look with each other. Then they were ordering the officers into the house. They swarmed around me and up the steps as an EMT rushed and guided me back to lean against one of the squad cars. I could hear them calling out to one another as they cleared inside as I was examined. "He's okay, Sheriff," he said as he finished and stepped back. "Just looks like he's in a bit of shock is all." The sheriff nodded and then gestured for me to follow him. As I did, I noticed something. None of these cruisers have their lights on, and they didn't use their sirens either. Even as focused as I was, I would have heard them approaching. The realization didn't sit right with me, neither did the look on the sheriff's face. With a low voice, the man asked me what had happened, what I had seen when I had entered the house. Fighting the adrenaline and fear still coursing through my system, I did my best to recount everything that had happened since placing the girl in my Jeep. When I had gotten to the part about what I had seen in the back door of the dining room, I saw his face darken even further than it already was. They do know what those things are. He stayed quiet for a time after I had finished, and then he sighed, as if he had come to a conclusion that he hadn't wanted to and spoke. "None of what you just told me is going to be written in your report, Deputy." I stared at the man in disbelief before he continued. "There's not going to be an incident report of this entire situation, to be more precise. As far as it will be concerned, it never happened." "Are you freaking serious, sir?" He nodded. "Oh, I'm dead serious, Deputy. And that is not all. When you return to the station tomorrow, you will find that none of the incident reports that you filed for the past cases, with the sole exception being the Kilcoin case, are there. They have been destroyed, and as of now, they never happened." I let out a half gasp, half laugh of shock. He didn't let me speak, though. He continued. "You're not an islander, Vincent. You came from the mainland. I say this with all due respect, but you're an outsider, and outsiders will never truly understand some things about life here. This," he gestured towards the house that was still filled with officers. "This is one of them." I finally found my voice again. "Sir, with all due respect to you as well, you're talking about covering up the disappearances, wait no, the deaths of 6 people. 6 people that were butchered and dragged off by God only knows what those things were. And you want me to shut my mouth and let you sweep this under the rug?" He locked eyes with me at my words, and I saw a look in them that I had never seen before. A hardness that he usually only reserved for criminals. "Yes, Deputy, I do. At least if you ever want to return to the mainland." I felt my jaw drop open at the man's open, not just implied threat. He spoke again. "We have dealt with them for a long time now, longer than I have been alive. As far as I know, since people moved to the island, and we've always taken care of our own when they return, we keep who we can save. And as for the unfortunate souls, he trailed off. What about those who lost people? I said, feeling a little surge of angry heat overwhelm the terrified side of myself. I gestured towards the girl now being loaded into the ambulance. What about people like her? He spared a look and then turned back to me. We make sure they understand why we don't say anything to people from the mainland. For the exact reason that I'm dealing with now, Deputy. We take care of our own. I glared at him for another moment and then lowered my eyes. The sheriff's threat had been clear, and I had no doubt that between him, the chief, and the others on the island, if I didn't accept the terms given to me, that I might end up disappearing as well. Finally, I asked one final question. And Kilcoyne, how are you going to explain that one? We'll place breadcrumbs, make it seem like she might have simply decided to walk out into the water and end it all. Maybe a person followed her from the mainland and abducted her. We'll figure it out, don't you worry. After a time, I finally nodded at not meeting the man's eyes. Fine, I said weakly. Fine, I won't say anything. I felt him place his hand on my shoulder. If you want to leave, I don't blame you one bit. I'll even give you a letter of recommendation for wherever on the mainland you would like to transfer to, as long as you keep your word. I didn't say anything back to him. I simply pulled out of his grasp and walked back to my Jeep, getting into it, and I drove away. I left Nantucket the very next day, turning in my letter of resignation to the sheriff's office and calling a moving company on the mainland to come and empty my house. I would end up placing it for sale once I left, happily, and it sold quickly to a nice family to use as their summer home. As I drove my Jeep onto the ferry, I remember seeing so many pairs of eyes on me. I saw the sheriff waving me farewell from the dock. I saw some of the residents giving me the side eye. I also felt other eyes on me, but those that I couldn't see the owners of. They came from beneath the dark waters of the Atlantic, and the feeling of them watching me never abated until the ferry was halfway back to the mainland. That was almost 44 years ago now. I ended up taking a job with the Massachusetts State Police, helped by the letter of recommendation that I did end up receiving from the sheriff. I kept that job for another 20 years before retiring in 2000. The sheriff had told the truth about what would happen in the case of Margaret Kilcoyne as well. Even though the case made the mainland news, owing to her brother trying to force new leads, they only found some clothes of her abandoned near a pond, along with her ID and some money, no doubt deliberately placed there to throw the state police and others off. Many ended up believing that she had committed suicide by drowning, and though the case stayed open for a while, interest eventually waned and it went cold. Today, barely anyone ever remembers the case, and many of those that did have died. Nobody ever found out the truth. Because islanders can keep a secret, I only ever went back to Nantucket once on a day trip in 2013. I honestly don't know why I did. Maybe I thought it would be a form of closure that I felt I had never gotten. It didn't help though. The place looked largely unchanged in 33 years, and all the memories came flooding back to me, especially when I drove by the house that had haunted my dreams for decades. The swing still hung from the front porch, and I shivered in the driver's seat of my Saab across the street, the memories seeming as fresh as if they had happened yesterday. Especially the memory of that webbed clawed hand snaking around the back door, the dark green, almost black scales glinting in the moonlight, the claws digging into the wood like it had been paper mache. I was happy to drive back onto the ferry to return to Cape Cod before the sun went down. I didn't feel the eyes on me like I had had all those years ago, but I knew they were still there, waiting. I'm in my early 70s now. The end of my life is rapidly approaching, especially after I was diagnosed with psoriasis of the liver a year ago, a result of drinking far too much for most of my life in an attempt to try and forget. But not even alcohol was ever enough to chase away the memories, the nightmares that woke me in a sheen of sweat, screaming. I finally decided, with me staring up at the bladed scythe of the Grim Reaper, that I needed to tell the truth about what happened all those years ago. Keeping quiet for over 40 years had burned a hole in my soul, and the threats from the sheriff, likely now long since dead, threw at me ring hollow. And so after hearing about this website, and more importantly this page, I heard about from my grandnephew, where others post accounts of things that they've experienced that are unexplainable and terrifying, I've chosen here to tell. I know full well that most people won't believe me, and that's honestly fine, and maybe it doesn't matter. But the truth is out there now. It's known. My conscience feels lighter being able to share it, and when it's my time, I'll go far more peacefully. But there's another reason that I've chosen to tell you all what happened in 1980. That frigid January so many miles from the mainland. It's to give you a warning, because I've kept tabs on the goings-on on Nantucket Island, and people still do disappear from there. Fishermen and others have disappeared from the island and the waters around it over the years, and those are the ones who, thanks to the internet and its ability to connect the entire world, weren't able to be swept under the rug. I'm sure there are far more people who disappear from the island than anyone will ever know. They're just still good at covering it up. I can't stop any one of you from going to Nantucket, and in all honesty, I'm not sure that I would want to. It in truth is still one of the most beautiful places that I've ever been to. If you would like to visit during the summer months, go. But if you do, don't let your guard down near the water at all. Because those things, those creatures are still out there. They are smart enough to clean up after themselves to remove all traces of their presence. The swept sand was proof of that. Stay near others as much as possible. Don't rent remote houses away from everybody else. And most importantly, if you ever hear any noises coming from around your house at night there, don't be like those unfortunate souls. Don't go and open the back door to investigate, because it'll likely be the last thing you ever do.